The man in the back seat held a secret that could destroy 200 families, and the woman behind the wheel didn't even know she was the weapon. Evan Mercer took a job nobody wanted, driving a silent CEO through a city of ghosts for $80,000 a year. No questions asked, no hope required, just 4 stops every day, like clockwork. But when his mute daughter climbed into that car and cracked open a woman made of ice, everything changed. Because some routes aren't about where you're going, they're about what you're running from. Stay with me until the end. Hit like and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The rain came down like judgment. Evan Mercer sat in his truck in the parking lot of Patterson Elementary, watching water hammer the windshield in sheets so thick the world outside looked like it was melting. His hands gripped the steering wheel even though the engine had been off for 10 minutes. Even though Lily was already inside, safe and dry and silent as a held breath. 7 years old, and she hadn't spoken in 11 months. Not since the hospice nurse had pulled the white sheet over her mother's face. Evan's phone buzzed against his thigh, 3rd time in as many minutes. He already knew what it said without looking. Rent overdue. Final notice. Legal action pending. The landlord had stopped being polite 6 weeks ago, right around the time Evan's unemployment benefits ran out and the temp agencies stopped returning his calls. He was 34 years old, college-educated, able-bodied, willing to work, and he couldn't afford to keep a roof over his daughter's head. The American dream had become a punchline, and Evan was the guy who'd forgotten to laugh. He pulled the newspaper from the passenger seat, actual newsprint, because his phone service had been downgraded to emergency only, and the library's Wi-Fi only reached the parking lot on Tuesdays. The classified section was circled, crossed out, highlighted, and coffee-stained. 3 months of searching had taught him to recognize the patterns. Self-starter meant no benefits, fast-paced environment meant sweatshop conditions, and family atmosphere meant they'd guilt you into working for free. But there was one ad he kept coming back to. It sat in the bottom corner of page C7, 3 lines of text that didn't fit any pattern he recognized. Private driver. Monfrey, 8 a.m., 6 p.m. $80,000 year. Discretion required. No questions. 550147. $80,000. Evan had read it so many times the ink was starting to smudge under his thumb. It had to be a scam, or worse, one of those situations where discretion required meant drug running or human trafficking or something that would land him in prison and leave Lily in foster care. But $80,000. He could pay off the rent, get ahead on bills, put Lily in therapy with someone who actually knew how to help kids who'd stopped believing words were worth the breath. Maybe even move out of the apartment where Sarah's ghost still lived in every corner, where the smell of her lavender lotion still clung to the bathroom towels, where Lily still set 3 plates at the dinner table every single night. The rain hammered harder. Evan looked at the phone in his hand. Emergency-only service, which meant this call would cost him, what? $5 he didn't have? 10? He dialed anyway. The line rang once, twice. Evan was about to hang up when a voice answered, clipped, British, utterly devoid of warmth. Hawthorne residence. Not hello, not how can I help you? Just a statement of fact, delivered like Evan should already know where he'd called. Yeah. Hi. I'm calling about the driver position, the ad in the... Are you currently employed, Mr. Mercer? Evan Mercer. No, I'm not currently... Do you have a valid driver's license and clean record? Yes, but can you begin immediately? Evan blinked. Rain drummed against metal. What? The position requires immediate availability, Mr. Mercer. If you're unable to commit, I have 4 other candidates waiting. Something in the man's voice suggested he wasn't bluffing. Evan thought about Lily inside the school building, eating the free breakfast because he'd run out of cereal 3 days ago. He thought about the eviction notice taped to their door. He thought about the stack of medical bills from Sarah's final months that he'd stopped opening because the numbers had stopped meaning anything except impossible. I can start immediately, he heard himself say. A pause. The scratch of pen on paper. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp, 1247 Hawthorne Lane. Enter through the service gate on Belmont. Do not use the main entrance. Bring your license, social security card, and 3 professional references. Wait, I don't have 3 professional. Personal references will suffice. Dress appropriately. You'll be meeting Mrs. Hawthorne. The line went dead. Evan stared at his phone, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't quite name. The whole thing had taken less than 90 seconds. No interview, no questions about experience, no background check mentioned. Just show up tomorrow like he was being summoned to court. Or a funeral. He Googled the address on his dying phone battery. Hawthorne Lane was in Briarwood Heights, the part of the city where old money went to hide from new problems. The kind of neighborhood where the houses had names instead of numbers, and the hedges were trimmed into geometric perfection by people who'd never be invited inside. Evan had driven through Briarwood Heights exactly once, 3 years ago, when Sarah was still healthy and they'd spent a Sunday afternoon pretending they could afford the life they saw through those iron gates. They'd laughed about it then, the absurdity of marble fountains and circular driveways when you couldn't even afford to fix the AC in your Honda. Neither of them was laughing now. The school bell rang, distant and tinny through the rain. Evan watched the doors, waiting for the flood of children that never included his daughter. Lily was always last. The teacher had learned to give her extra time, had stopped trying to make her join the morning circle or say the Pledge of Allegiance or participate in anything that required a voice. She appeared finally, a small shadow in a too-big raincoat, her backpack dragging behind her like an anchor. The teacher walked her to the curb, held an umbrella over her head, tried to make eye contact that Lily wouldn't return. Evan got out and jogged through the rain, waving to show he was there. He hadn't forgotten. He was still trying to be the parent she deserved. "Hey, Ladybug." He took her backpack, felt its weight. Too heavy for a second grader, but Lily carried everything everywhere now, like she was preparing for evacuation at any moment. "How was school?" She looked at him with Sarah's eyes, that same gray-green that changed color with the weather, and said nothing. The teacher smiled with professional sympathy. "She did great in art today, really great. Didn't you, Lily?" Lily turned and walked to the truck without acknowledging either of them. "She's processing," the teacher said quietly. "It takes time. Have you considered—" "We're on a waiting list," Evan lied. The truth was he couldn't afford the evaluation, let alone the therapy. The truth was every social service he'd contacted had forms that required addresses he might not have in 30 days and insurance he'd lost 4 months ago. The teacher nodded like she believed him. "Well, see you Monday." Evan got Lily buckled in, her small body rigid and distant, and drove home through streets that looked gray even without the rain. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been vintage in the listings, but turned out to be falling apart in reality. The hallway smelled like someone's fish dinner and someone else's weed. The eviction notice was still on their door. Evan ripped it down and shoved it in his pocket before Lily could see. Inside, the apartment was exactly as he'd left it. Breakfast dishes in the sink, Lily's latest drawing taped to the refrigerator, a house with no people, as always. Sarah's reading glasses still on the coffee table because Evan couldn't bring himself to move them. Lily went straight to her room and closed the door. Evan stood in the kitchen and pulled out the crumpled newspaper, reading the ad one more time. $80,000 a year. Discretion required. No questions. The smart move was to walk away. The safe move was to keep grinding through temp agencies and food stamps and the slow erosion of everything he'd thought life was supposed to be. But Evan hadn't made a smart or safe decision in 11 months. He made Lily's favorite dinner, spaghetti with butter, and the fancy Parmesan she liked, the kind that cost an extra $2 but made her eat 4 whole bites instead of 3. She sat at the table with her markers, drawing the same house she always drew, and Evan pretended not to notice she'd stopped setting a place for Sarah. That night, after Lily was asleep, Evan pulled his only suit from the back of the closet. It still smelled faintly of Sarah's perfume from the funeral, when he'd held Lily against his chest and felt her small body shake with silent sobs. And he'd promised her that everything would be okay. He'd been lying then, too. But maybe tomorrow would be different. Maybe tomorrow he'd drive through those iron gates and find something that looked like hope. Or maybe he'd just find another way to fail. 6 a.m. came like a threat. Evan had been awake since 4, running through every possible disaster scenario. His truck would break down. He'd get the address wrong. His suit would have a stain he couldn't see in the dark. They'd take one look at him and realize he was exactly what he was, desperate. He'd arranged for Mrs. Chen from 2B to watch Lily before school. She'd agreed immediately, the way she always did, looking at him with eyes that said, "I know what it's like to survive on luck and prayer." Mrs. Chen had fled Vietnam with nothing but her children and a bag of rice. She understood that sometimes you took jobs that felt wrong because the alternative was worse. Lily had nodded when he explained he had an interview, but her eyes had gone distant again, and Evan knew what she was thinking. "You'll leave and not come back, just like Mom did." "I promise," he'd whispered, kissing her forehead. "I promise I'm coming back." She hadn't answered. The drive to Briarwood Heights took 40 minutes through a city just waking up, delivery trucks and shift workers, and people who cleaned office buildings while everyone else slept. Evan's truck coughed asthmatically at every red light, and he prayed to anyone who might be listening that it would hold together for one more day. Hawthorne Lane appeared like a border crossing. One moment Evan was driving through normal streets with normal houses, and the next he was entering a different country entirely. The road narrowed. Trees arched overhead, their branches forming a tunnel. Walls appeared, stone and brick and iron, each one higher than the last, each one hiding estates that sprawled back into manicured infinity. 1247 was at the end of the lane. The main entrance was exactly what Evan had expected. 20-foot iron gates with the Hawthorne name worked into the metalwork in letters that looked like they'd been there since the founding of the Republic. A stone wall stretched in both directions, topped with cameras that probably cost more than Evan's truck. He followed the wall to Belmont Street and found the service entrance, a smaller gate, still imposing, with an intercom mounted on a post. Evan rolled down his window and pressed the button. Static, then, "Name." "Evan Mercer. I'm here for—" The gate swung open before he could finish. The driveway was longer than his street back home. It curved through gardens that looked like someone had taken a paintbrush to reality. Every flower perfectly placed, every hedge sculpted into submission, every blade of grass the exact same height. The house itself rose at the end like something out of a novel Evan had been forced to read in high school. 3 stories of gray stone, tall windows, columns that served no purpose except to remind you how small you were. Evan parked near the side entrance where the gate had directed him and killed the engine. His hands were shaking. $80,000, he reminded himself. For Lily. The door opened before he could knock. The man who answered was exactly the voice on the phone. 60-something, British, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Evan's rent. His expression suggested he was looking at something unpleasant but necessary, like a clogged drain. "Mr. Mercer, you're early. Is that a problem?" "It's unusual." The man stepped aside. "I'm Arthur. I manage the household. Come in. Wipe your feet." The interior was exactly what Evan had expected, and somehow worse: marble floors, artwork that looked important, furniture that seemed designed to be admired rather than used. Everything was beige and cream and tasteful, and nothing, absolutely nothing, looked like anyone actually lived here. It looked like a museum or a mausoleum. Arthur led him through a series of hallways, their footsteps echoing in a way that made Evan acutely aware of how loud he was, how out of place, how obviously he didn't belong in spaces where even the air felt expensive. They stopped outside a door at the end of a corridor. "A few things before you meet Mrs. Hawthorne," Arthur said. His tone suggested this was the only warning Evan would receive. "First, discretion is not a suggestion, it's a requirement. You will never discuss Mrs. Hawthorne, her schedule, or anything you observe during your employment. Not with friends, not with family, not with anyone. Sign a contract agreeing to this or leave now." Evan nodded. "Second, Mrs. Hawthorne values punctuality, precision, and silence. You will arrive at 7:45 every morning. You will drive the route she specifies, exactly as she specifies it. You will not deviate, you will not ask questions, and you will not attempt conversation unless she initiates it." "She doesn't like to talk?" Arthur's expression could have frozen nitrogen. "Third, this is not a friendship, Mr. Mercer. This is not therapy. This is not an opportunity for you to fix, save, or heal anyone. Mrs. Hawthorne does not need fixing. She needs a driver who can follow instructions. Can you do that?" Something in the way he said it made Evan's skin crawl. Not because it was rude, but because it was too specific. Like Arthur had given this speech before. to other drivers who hadn't lasted. How many people have had this job before me? That's a question, Mr. Mercer. You said I could ask. I said Mrs. Hawthorne might initiate conversation. I said nothing about questions being welcome. Arthur straightened his already perfect tie. Do you want this position or not? Evan thought about Lily's silence, the eviction notice, the stack of bills, the way hope had become something he could no longer afford. Yes. Then remember, you're being paid to drive, not to care. Arthur opened the door. The office beyond was darker than the rest of the house, with heavy curtains blocking most of the morning light. A desk dominated the far wall, antique, massive, the kind presidents signed important documents on. Behind it sat a woman who looked like she'd been carved from ice. Celeste Hawthorne was maybe 40, maybe 50. It was impossible to tell because she wore her age the way some people wore armor, smooth and impenetrable. Her hair was pulled back so severely it looked painful. Her suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored and completely devoid of personality. She didn't look up when Evan entered. She was reading something on her computer screen, her face utterly expressionless. Mrs. Hawthorne, Arthur said, Mr. Mercer is here. She clicked her mouse once, twice. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale, clear, and completely empty. You're early, she said. Her voice matched her appearance, beautiful in an inhuman way, like listening to a machine that had learned to speak. I wanted to make a good impression. Did you? It wasn't a question. She studied him with the same expression someone might use to examine a stain on expensive carpet. You need this job. Yes, ma'am. Why? Evan hesitated. Arthur had said no questions, but apparently interrogation was fine when it flowed in the other direction. I have a daughter, he said carefully. I need to provide for her. You're a single father. Yes. Widowed or divorced? The word stuck in his throat. Widowed. Something flickered across Celeste's face. There and gone so fast, Evan thought he might have imagined it. She turned to Arthur. He'll do. Arthur produced a contract from seemingly nowhere, 5 pages of dense legal text that probably said Evan was signing away his soul in exchange for reliable paychecks. Evan skimmed it anyway. Confidentiality agreements, arbitration clauses, termination conditions that could be triggered at employers' sole discretion. He signed. Celeste didn't smile or congratulate him or offer any of the normal human responses to hiring someone. She simply said, 7:45 tomorrow morning. Don't be late. Yes, ma'am. And the route? Arthur will provide details. She'd already turned back to her computer, dismissing him without another word. Arthur escorted Evan back through the marble hallways, handed him a folder with the route information, and walked him to his truck without speaking. It was only when Evan's hand was on the door handle that Arthur said, One more thing, Mr. Mercer. Evan turned. The butler's expression had softened by perhaps 1 degree, from permafrost to merely frozen. Whatever you see during your employment here, remember that grief looks different on everyone. And some people, he paused, choosing his words carefully, some people build very elaborate cages to keep themselves safe. Don't try to open them. I wasn't planning to. Good. Arthur's face hardened again. Because the last 3 drivers tried. And all 3 quit within 2 months because they couldn't stand watching someone refuse to be saved. He went back inside before Evan could ask what that meant. Evan drove home in a daze, the folder on his passenger seat like a ticking bomb. He waited until he was back at the apartment until Lily was at school and he had the place to himself before he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 addresses. Stop 1, St. Catherine's Children's Hospital, East Wing entrance. Arrive 8:15 a.m. Duration, 15 minutes. Stop 2, Morrison and Vance Law Offices, 14th floor. Arrive 9:00 a.m. Duration, 20 minutes. Stop 3, Hawthorne Foundation Building, under construction, north entrance. Arrive 10:00 a.m. Duration, 10 minutes. Stop 4, First Continental Bank executive entrance. Arrive 11:00 a.m. Duration, 30 minutes. Return to estate by 12:00 p.m. That was it. No explanation. No context. Just 4 stops, timed to the minute, with instructions that read like a military operation. Evan stared at the paper, trying to make it make sense. A children's hospital, a law office, a construction site, a bank. What could possibly connect those 4 locations? And why would someone worth enough to live in that house need a driver to take her to the same places every single day? Don't ask questions, Arthur had said. You're being paid to drive, not to care. Evan folded the paper and slipped it back into the folder. $80,000 a year for Lily. He could drive the route. He could keep his mouth shut. He could ignore whatever strange grief Arthur had hinted at because he had his own grief to carry. Thank you very much. And he'd learned the hard way that you couldn't save someone who didn't want saving. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen saying Lily was home from school, and did he want her to keep watching her until he got back? Evan texted back, "Yes, please. Thank you." Then he sat in his kitchen, in the apartment he might actually be able to keep now, and tried not to think about the way Celeste Hawthorne's eyes had looked, pale and clear and utterly empty, like someone had scooped out everything human and left only the shell behind. He'd seen eyes like that before. In the hospice, at the end, when Sarah had stopped fighting and started letting go, when the pain meds had finally kicked in enough that she could float somewhere beyond reach, and she'd looked at him with eyes that were already halfway gone. Don't try to fix her, Arthur had warned. Evan had no intention of trying. He'd learned that lesson once already, watching the woman he loved slip away despite every prayer and bargain and desperate promise he'd made. You couldn't fix people. You could only watch them break and collect your paycheck while you did it. The first morning arrived with the kind of clarity that felt aggressive. Blue sky, sharp sunlight, birds singing like they hadn't gotten the memo about how miserable everything was. Evan, dressed in his suit, kissed Lily goodbye. She didn't respond, but her eyes followed him to the door, and drove to Hawthorne Lane with 20 minutes to spare. The service gate opened at precisely 7:45. A black Mercedes sedan waited in the circular drive. So new it still had the dealer tags, so expensive Evan was afraid to breathe on it. Arthur stood beside it, holding the keys. "You'll drive this from now on," he said, handing them over like he was performing a hostage exchange. "It's armored, GPS tracked, and equipped with emergency communications. Do not damage it. Do not modify any settings. Do not—" "I get it," Evan said. "Treat it like it's made of spun gold and orphan tears." Arthur's expression suggested he didn't appreciate humor before 8 a.m. "Mrs. Hawthorne will be out at 8:00 exactly. Be ready." He was. At 7:58, Evan stood beside the Mercedes, door open, trying to look like someone who'd driven luxury vehicles his entire life, instead of someone whose previous car had required a coat hanger to keep the muffler attached. At 8:00 he's out. Not 7:59 or 8:01, but exactly on time, the side door opened. Celeste Hawthorne emerged. She looked exactly as she had the day before. Severe hair, gray suit, expression that gave away nothing. She walked to the car without acknowledging Evan, slid into the back seat with mechanical precision, and stared straight ahead. "St. Catherine's," she said. Evan closed her door, got behind the wheel, and pulled out of the driveway. The drive to the hospital took 17 minutes through morning traffic. Celeste sat in the back seat like a statue. No phone calls, no laptop, no movement at all except for the slow blink of her eyes. Evan tried to ignore her presence, tried to focus on the road, but it was like driving with a black hole in the back seat. Something that pulled at the edges of his awareness, no matter how hard he tried to ignore it. St. Catherine's Children's Hospital was a sprawling complex on the east side of the city, the kind of place that tried very hard to not look like a building where children suffered. Murals on the walls, colorful sculptures in the courtyard, windows designed to let in maximum light. Evan pulled up to the East Wing entrance at exactly 8:15. Celeste got out without a word and disappeared inside. Evan waited. 15 minutes, the schedule had said. He watched the clock on the dashboard tick through the seconds. 8:16, 8:17, 8:18. He watched parents carrying sleeping children through the automatic doors. He watched a kid in a wheelchair, bald from chemo, laughing at something on his phone, while his mother looked like she was holding herself together with wire and prayer. At 8:30 exactly, Celeste emerged. Her expression hadn't changed. She got back in the car, sat in the exact same position, and said, "Morrison and Vance." Evan drove. The law office was downtown in one of those glass towers that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. Celeste was inside for exactly 20 minutes, 8:52 to 9:12, while Evan sat in the loading zone with his hazards on and tried not to get a ticket. Then the foundation building, a construction site surrounded by chain-link fence, with a sign announcing it would be a state-of-the-art facility for something Evan couldn't quite read from the car. Celeste walked to the fence, stood there for exactly 10 minutes staring at the skeletal framework, and returned to the car. Finally, the bank. The executive entrance, where people who had more money than Evan would see in 10 lifetimes came and went in suits that cost more than his truck. Celeste was inside for 30 minutes while Evan sat and watched wealth walk past him in shoes he couldn't afford to repair. At 11:42, she emerged. "Home," she said. They drove back to Hawthorne Lane in the same silence they'd left it. Celeste got out without saying goodbye, without saying thank you, without acknowledging Evan's existence. Arthur appeared as if summoned. "Tomorrow, 7:45. And that was it, day one complete. Evan drove home feeling like he'd just performed surgery on a ghost, precise, necessary, and completely inexplicable. He picked up Lily from Mrs. Chen's, made her lunch, she ate 4 bites, a new record, and tried to explain to her that Daddy had a real job now. A good job, one that would let them stay in their apartment and maybe even buy her new shoes. Lily drew her house with no people and said nothing. That night, Evan lay awake and tried to piece together what he'd witnessed. A children's hospital, a law office, a construction site, a bank. The same route, timed to the minute, performed with the precision of a religious ritual. What the hell was Celeste Hawthorne doing? And why did it feel less like a job and more like watching someone slowly disappear? The days blurred together with a sameness that felt intentional. Monday through Friday, 7:45 a.m. to 12:00 p.m. The same route, the same silence, the same expressionless woman getting in and out of the car like she was performing a play for an audience of none. Evan stopped trying to make small talk after the 3rd day, when his "nice morning, isn't it?" was met with the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals. He stopped trying to anticipate her needs after he'd offered her a bottle of water and she'd looked at it like he'd handed her a live snake. He just drove and watched and tried not to care. But here's the thing about silence. It has weight, and the more time Evan spent in that car with Celeste Hawthorne, the more he felt it pressing down on both of them, this enormous, suffocating thing that neither of them could name. She never spoke except to give directions. She never made phone calls. She never read or worked or did anything except sit and stare with those winter sky eyes at a world she seemed determined not to see. At the hospital, she would disappear into the East Wing and return exactly 15 minutes later. At the law office, 20 minutes, always the 14th floor. At the construction site, 10 minutes of standing at the fence like she was visiting a grave. At the bank, 30 minutes in meetings Evan could only imagine. And then home, where Arthur would be waiting like a sentinel, and Celeste would disappear into that enormous house, and Evan wouldn't see her again until the next morning at 8 into exactly. It should have been easy. Show up, drive, collect paycheck, go home to Lily. But something was wrong. Evan felt it in his gut, the same way he'd felt it in the hospice when Sarah's doctors had stopped talking about treatment and started talking about comfort. That shift from fighting to surrendering, from living to just existing. Celeste Hawthorne wasn't living. She was performing the motions of life with the precision of clockwork, but there was nothing behind it. No joy, no anger, no frustration, no hope. Just the same route, day after day, like she was trying to wear a groove in the universe deep enough that she'd eventually disappear into it. "Don't try to fix her," Arthur had said. Evan wasn't trying, but he was noticing, and noticing he was learning was its own kind of problem. 3 weeks in, Lily got sick. It started as a cough, the kind every parent recognizes as trouble, wet and deep, and getting worse. Evan kept her home from school, set her up on the couch with blankets and cartoons, and called Mrs. Chen to ask if she could watch her for the morning. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Chen said, her voice heavy with genuine regret. "My daughter, she need me today. Take to doctor appointment. I cannot—" "It's okay," Evan said, even though it absolutely wasn't. "Thanks anyway." He hung up and looked at Lily, who was curled into a ball on the couch, her breathing raspy, her forehead hot enough that he didn't need a thermometer to know she had a fever. The smart move was to call in sick. Tell Arthur he couldn't make it. Take Lily to urgent care and deal with whatever consequences came from missing work. But Evan had been poor long enough to know that call in sick was a luxury people like him couldn't afford. 3 weeks wasn't long enough to prove he was reliable. Hell, 3 weeks wasn't long enough to prove he'd last longer than the previous drivers. One missed day could be all it took for Celeste to decide he was just another person who couldn't follow simple instructions. He looked at the clock, 7:15. He looked at Lily, small and sick and silent. He made a decision that was probably stupid and definitely desperate. "Hey, Ladybug," he said, crouching beside the couch. "How do you feel about coming to work with Daddy today?" Lily looked at him with fever-bright eyes and said nothing, which Evan took as consent. He bundled her into the car with blankets and her stuffed rabbit and a water bottle, drove to Hawthorne Lane with his heart in his throat, and prayed that Arthur wouldn't actually kill him. The service gate opened at 7:45, same as always. Evan pulled into the circular drive, got out, and was immediately intercepted by Arthur, whose expression suggested he'd just witnessed a cardinal sin. "Mr. Mercer." "What is that?" "That's my daughter, Lily. She's sick. I couldn't find childcare, and I didn't want to miss—" "You brought a child to work without authorization." "I know, and I'm sorry, but she won't be any trouble, I promise. She's very quiet. She won't even—" "Mrs. Hawthorne does not—" Arthur stopped. His jaw worked like he was physically restraining himself from saying something catastrophic. "Wait here." He disappeared into the house. Evan stood beside the Mercedes, stomach churning, while Lily watched from the back seat of his truck with eyes that had seen too many adults fail at simple promises. "I'm sorry," he wanted to say. "I'm sorry I can't afford better. I'm sorry I keep making choices that put you in impossible situations. I'm sorry your mom died and left us here alone." But before he could figure out how to say any of that, Arthur reappeared. His expression was complicated. Surprised, maybe, or disturbed. "Mrs. Hawthorne will allow the child to accompany you. This one time only. Do not make it a habit." Evan blinked. "Seriously?" "Get her in the car before I change my mind." Evan moved before Arthur could reconsider, transferring Lily from the truck to the Mercedes with the speed of someone defusing a bomb. She curled up in the corner of the back seat, wrapped in her blanket, still silent, but at least safe. At 8:12, Celeste emerged. She stopped when she saw Lily. For the first time in 3 weeks, her expression changed, just a flicker, like someone had disturbed still water. She looked at Lily the way someone might look at a ghost, or a memory, or something they thought was safely buried. Then she got in the car, sat in her usual spot, and stared straight ahead. But Evan saw it, the way her hands clenched briefly in her lap, the way her breathing changed just for a second, the way she looked at Lily like she was seeing oxygen for the first time in years. "St. Catherine's," Celeste said. Her voice was exactly the same. But something had cracked. And Evan drove, his daughter's raspy breathing filling the silence, and tried not to think about what Arthur had said. Don't try to fix her. But what if he wasn't trying? What if Lily was? The fever broke on day 4. Evan had planned to keep Lily home just the one day, had apologized profusely to Arthur, had promised it would never happen again, had fully expected to be told that bringing his sick child to chauffeur a silent CEO was grounds for immediate termination. Instead, Arthur had said, "Mrs. Hawthorne expects you both tomorrow, same time." "Both?" "Did I stutter, Mr. Mercer?" So Lily came back. And the day after that, and the day after that, until it stopped being an emergency measure and started being the routine. Evan would bundle her into the Mercedes each morning, sometimes sleepy, sometimes feverish, always silent, and she would curl up in the back seat while Celeste sat ramrod straight in the opposite corner. And Celeste would watch her, not obviously, not in a way that required acknowledgement or explanation, but Evan saw it in the rearview mirror, the way Celeste's eyes would drift toward Lily when she thought no one was looking, the way her expression would soften by microscopic degrees, the way her breathing would change when Lily shifted in her sleep. It was like watching someone remember they had a body, a heart, a capacity for anything beyond mechanical precision. Lily, for her part, seemed completely unbothered by the strange woman sharing the car. She would settle into her corner with her blanket and her rabbit, watching the city pass with those two old eyes, occasionally coughing into her elbow, but otherwise existing in the same careful silence she'd perfected over 11 months of grief. Two silent people, Evan thought, orbiting each other in the back of a luxury sedan, both of them locked in their own private prisons, both of them pretending the other didn't exist. Except that wasn't quite true, because on the sixth morning, something changed. They were pulling up to St. Catherine's when Lily's rabbit fell from her lap and landed near Celeste's feet. Lily looked at it, then at Celeste, her expression uncertain, like she was trying to calculate whether retrieving her toy was worth acknowledging another human being. Celeste reached down, picked up the rabbit, and held it out. No words, no smile. Just the simple gesture of one person helping another. Lily took it back, clutching it to her chest. And Celeste's hand stayed extended for just a moment longer than necessary, fingers curled around empty air, like she'd forgotten what to do once the transaction was complete. Then she pulled back, turned to stare out the window, and said, "St. Catherine's." Like nothing had happened, but Evan saw the way her hands were shaking. The children's hospital looked different with Lily in the car. Evan had stopped really seeing it after the first week, had let it become just another stop on the route, another place where Celeste disappeared for exactly 15 minutes. But now, watching parents carry sick children through those automatic doors, watching nurses in bright scrubs try to make tragedy look cheerful, he couldn't help but wonder what Celeste was doing in there. Why a children's hospital? Why exactly 15 minutes? Why the same wing, the same entrance, the same schedule, day after day? Celeste emerged at 8:30, same as always. But when she got back in the car, Evan saw something he'd never noticed before. Her eyes were red, not crying. Celeste Hawthorne didn't look like someone capable of tears, but red, like she'd been standing in a wind tunnel, or like she'd been staring at something so hard her body had rebelled. She glanced at Lily, who was dozing in the corner. "Morrison and Vance," Celeste said. Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the second word. The law office was the same as always, 20 minutes on the 14th floor, Evan waiting in the loading zone while delivery trucks and taxis played a hostile game of automotive chess around him. When Celeste returned, she was carrying a manila folder that she immediately tucked into her bag, her movements sharp and controlled, but her hands were still shaking. At the construction site, Celeste stood at the chain-link fence for her usual 10 minutes, staring at the half-built skeleton of whatever the Hawthorne Foundation was becoming. Evan watched her from the car, watched the way she gripped the fence with both hands, watched the way her shoulders rose and fell with breathing that looked more like drowning. Lily woke up and followed his gaze. "Who is she?" Lily whispered. Evan nearly drove off the road. It was the first time Lily had spoken, actually spoken, with words and voice and intention in 11 months. The first time since she'd stood at Sarah's grave and said, "Goodbye, Mama," in a voice so small Evan had barely heard it. He white-knuckled the steering wheel and tried to keep his voice steady. "Her name is Mrs. Hawthorne. She's my boss." "She's sad." Two words that landed like artillery shells. "Yeah, Ladybug, I think she is." "Like us?" Evan looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter's gray-green eyes, Sarah's eyes, watching Celeste through the window with the kind of recognition that shouldn't exist in a 7-year-old. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Like us." Lily nodded, processing this information with the gravity of a war correspondent, then curled back into her blanket and said nothing else. But something had shifted. When Celeste returned to the car, Lily was watching her, really watching her, with an intensity that made Evan nervous. And when Celeste settled into her seat, she met Lily's gaze for exactly 3 seconds before looking away. "First Continental," she said. At the bank, Celeste was inside for 32 minutes instead of 30. When she emerged, her expression was more glacial than usual, the kind of cold that suggested something had gone very wrong behind those executive doors. She got in the car and sat with her spine so rigid Evan thought it might snap. "Home." The word came out like broken glass. Evan drove. Lily watched Celeste, Celeste stared at nothing with eyes that had gone from winter sky to frozen wasteland. They were halfway back to Hawthorne Lane when Lily spoke again. My mama died. The car swerved slightly. Evan corrected it, heart hammering, because Jesus Christ, Lily, why now? Why here? Why? Celeste's head turned slowly, like a turret acquiring a target. Lily kept going, her voice steady and factual. She had cancer. Hurt her a lot. Then she went to sleep and didn't wake up. Silence. Then, I'm sorry, Celeste said. 2 words. The first personal thing Evan had heard her say in 6 weeks. Lily nodded, accepting this. Do you miss someone too? Evan wanted to intervene, wanted to explain that you couldn't just ask strangers about their trauma, wanted to protect both of them from whatever was about to happen. But Celeste was looking at Lily with an expression Evan had never seen before. Not quite human, but close. Like she was remembering how to be a person instead of a machine. Yes, Celeste said finally. I miss someone too. Does it hurt all the time? Yes. Daddy says it gets better, but it doesn't. Celeste's hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white. No, it doesn't. They looked at each other across the back seat, a 7-year-old who'd stopped speaking and a 40-something CEO who'd stopped living, and something passed between them that had no words, no explanation, no category Evan could name. Recognition, maybe. Or permission. The permission to be broken without pretending otherwise. We're here, Mrs. Hawthorne, Evan said quietly, pulling through the service gate. Celeste didn't move for a long moment. Then she opened the door, stepped out, and paused. Tomorrow, she said to Lily. Not to Evan. To Lily. Will you be coming tomorrow? Lily looked at her father, then back at Celeste. Yes. Good. Celeste walked into the house without looking back. Arthur appeared, his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Mercer. A word. Evan got out of the car, leaving Lily in the back seat. Arthur led him a few steps away, out of earshot, his voice low and urgent. What did your daughter say to her? The truth, that her mother died, that she misses her. Arthur's expression flickered, surprise, concern, something that might have been fear. And Mrs. Hawthorne responded? She said she misses someone too. Christ, Arthur pinched the bridge of his nose. Mr. Mercer, do you understand what you're doing? Driving? You're opening a door that's been sealed for 5 years. You're making her remember things she spent half a decade trying to forget. I'm not doing anything, Evan interrupted. My daughter is 7 years old and grieving. If she found someone else who understands that, I'm not going to stop her. You should. Why? Arthur looked at him with eyes that had seen things Evan couldn't imagine. Because the last time someone made Mrs. Hawthorne feel something, she nearly destroyed herself. And I will not stand by and watch it happen again. He walked away before Evan could ask what that meant. That night, Lily ate 6 bites of dinner. She drew her house, but this time she added a stick figure in one of the windows, just a circle for a head, 2 dots for eyes, a line for a mouth. No smile. But present. Existing. Who's that? Evan asked. Lily looked at her drawing. The sad lady. Evan's throat tightened. She's pretty sad, huh? Yeah. But she's not alone anymore. Neither are you, Evan wanted to say. But the words stuck because he wasn't sure if it was true. Lily had spoken today. Actual words. Actual sentences. But she'd done it for Celeste, not for him. She'd opened up to a stranger who understood her grief in a way Evan apparently didn't. And he didn't know if that was progress or just a different kind of breaking. The next morning, Lily dressed herself without being asked. She brought her rabbit and a small sketch pad, settling into the Mercedes like it was her personal office. When Celeste emerged at 8 en tumult, Lily looked up and said, Good morning. Celeste stopped, hand on the car door, staring at this small person who'd just spoken to her voluntarily. Good morning, she replied. It was the longest exchange they'd had. At St. Catherine's, Lily asked, Can I come inside? Evan nearly crashed into a parked ambulance. Celeste looked at her, then at Evan. Is that acceptable? I guess? If you're sure. Come, Celeste said to Lily. They went inside together. Celeste and Lily, disappearing through the automatic doors while Evan sat in the car and tried to figure out what the hell was happening. 15 minutes passed. 20. 25. Evan was about to go in after them when they emerged, Lily holding Celeste's hand, both of them walking slowly, both of them wearing expressions that suggested they'd witnessed something important. They got back in the car without explanation. "Morrison and Vance," Celeste said, but her voice was softer. Over the next week, a routine developed. Lily would come inside at the hospital. Evan never learned what they did there, and neither of them volunteered the information. She would wait in the car at the law office, drawing in her sketch pad, while Celeste conducted whatever business required exactly 20 minutes on the 14th floor. At the construction site, Lily would stand next to Celeste at the fence, both of them staring at the unfinished building like it was a puzzle they were trying to solve. And slowly, incrementally, Celeste began to speak. Not a lot. Not conversations exactly, but observations, facts. Small pieces of information offered like someone testing whether the ice would hold. "This will be a rehabilitation center," she said at the construction site one morning, "for children with traumatic injuries, physical therapy, occupational therapy, art therapy." Lily nodded seriously. "Art therapy is when you draw your feelings." "Yes. I draw houses." "I noticed. They're empty because Mama's not there anymore." Celeste was quiet for a long moment. "I understand." At the bank, after one particularly long meeting, Celeste emerged looking like she'd been in a fight. She got in the car, closed her eyes, and sat in silence for 3 full minutes before speaking. "I despise Thursdays," she said to no one in particular. "Why?" Lily asked. "Because Thursday is when my board of directors reminds me that money is more important than people." Lily considered this. "That's stupid." The corner of Celeste's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough that Evan nearly drove off the road again. "Yes," Celeste said. "It is stupid." At home that evening, Evan tried to ask Lily about what she and Celeste talked about at the hospital, but Lily just shook her head. "It's private," she said. "Private how?" "Like how you and Mama used to talk after I went to bed." "Private." Evan didn't push. If Lily was talking, actually talking, forming sentences, engaging with the world, he wasn't going to interrogate her about it. Even if it stung that she was opening up to someone else instead of him. Even if it scared him how quickly Celeste was becoming important to his daughter. Even if Arthur's warning kept echoing in his head. The last time someone made Mrs. Hawthorne feel something, she nearly destroyed herself. But Evan kept driving because that's what desperate people did. They took the paycheck and ignored the warning signs and hoped that everything would work out despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Besides, he'd seen something in the rearview mirror that morning that made him think maybe, this wasn't the disaster Arthur predicted. Celeste had smiled at Lily. Just for a second, just the ghost of an expression. But it had been real and human, and it had transformed her face from ice sculpture into something that looked almost alive. And if Lily could do that, if a 7-year-old girl who'd stopped speaking could remind a frozen CEO that being human was still possible, then maybe there was hope for both of them. Or maybe Evan was just an idiot who'd confused proximity for progress. Time would tell. On Friday of the 3rd week with Lily in the car, everything changed. They'd finished the usual route: hospital, law office, construction site, bank, and were heading back to Hawthorne Lane when Celeste suddenly said, "Stop." Evan pulled over, heart racing. "Is everything okay?" "There." Celeste pointed to a small park across the street. Nothing fancy, just swings and a jungle gym and some benches where elderly people fed pigeons. "I want to go there." It was 11:47. They were supposed to be back by noon. This was the first deviation from the route in 7 weeks. "Are you sure?" Evan asked. "No." Celeste opened the door. "Come, Lily." They crossed the street together, Evan trailing behind like a confused bodyguard, and stopped at the edge of the playground. It was mostly empty on a Friday morning, just a few toddlers and their caregivers, but Celeste stared at it like it was a battlefield. Lily tugged her hand. "Do you want to swing?" "I don't know how." Everyone knows how to swing." "I meant, I don't remember." Lily led her to the swings, demonstrating with the patient authority of someone who'd lived several lifetimes in 7 years. You sit here, hold the chains, then you pump your legs like this. Celeste sat gingerly on the swing, her expensive suit completely out of place, her hands gripping the chains like they were the only thing keeping her anchored to earth. She moved her legs experimentally, gained an inch of height, stopped. "It's terrifying," she said. "Yeah," Lily agreed, "but if you go high enough, you can see everything." They swung in silence for a few minutes, Lily going higher and higher, Celeste barely moving, both of them existing in the same space but completely different orbits. Then Celeste said, "His name was Julian." Evan, standing near the bench, felt his blood freeze. "He loved swings," Celeste continued, her voice barely audible. "He would stay here for hours, pumping higher and higher, laughing like gravity was a game he could win. I would sit on this bench and work on my phone and tell myself I was supervising, but really I was just not present, not paying attention, not seeing him." Lily slowed her swing, listening. "He was 6 when he fell," Celeste said, "from the monkey bars, traumatic brain injury. He survived, but he was different, needed constant care, specialized schools, therapies I couldn't pronounce. I tried. I hired the best doctors, the best therapists. I built a foundation in his name. I threw money at the problem like money could fix broken neurons and damaged connections." Her swing came to a stop. "But money can't fix everything. And Julian needed more than I could give him. He needed someone who could be patient, present, capable of putting their child before their company. So I found him a place. A good place. The best place. Where professionals could care for him in ways I couldn't." "You sent him away," Lily said quietly. "Yes." "Did he come back?" "No. He died 3 years later. An infection, they said. Something preventable. Something that wouldn't have happened if I'd been there. If I'd been watching." The playground sounds seemed very far away. Children laughing, pigeons cooing, traffic humming. But in their small corner, there was only silence and the weight of confession. "The hospital is where he was born," Celeste said. "The law office is where I signed the papers to commit him. The foundation is what I'm building to save children I couldn't save 5 years ago. And the bank is where my board reminds me every week that I'm spending too much money on guilt instead of profit." She looked at Lily, really looked at her, with eyes that were finally human. "I've been visiting those places every day for 5 years. Like if I retrace the steps enough times, I'll find the moment where I made the wrong choice, where I could have chosen differently, where I could have been a better mother." Lily slipped off her swing and walked over to Celeste. Without hesitation, without fear, she climbed into Celeste's lap and wrapped her arms around her neck. "You didn't kill him," Lily said. "Sometimes people die and it's nobody's fault. That's what the grief counselor told Daddy. I don't know if it's true, but Daddy cried after, so maybe it helped." Celeste's arms came up slowly, mechanically, like she'd forgotten how to hug. But then she held Lily, actually held her, tightly and desperately, and her body started to shake. She was crying. The ice statue was melting, right there on a playground swing, holding a 7-year-old who understood grief better than most adults. Evan stood frozen by the bench, watching this moment he had no right to witness, feeling like an intruder at something sacred. He wanted to look away, to give them privacy, but he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except watch Celeste Hawthorne fall apart in the arms of his daughter. They stayed like that for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20. Time stopped having meaning, and when Celeste finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and red and completely, devastatingly human. "Thank you," she whispered to Lily. "You're welcome." They walked back to the car in silence. Evan drove to Hawthorne Lane in silence. Arthur was waiting in the driveway, his expression moving through several stages of shock as he took in Celeste's appearance, the smudged mascara, the red eyes, the way she was still holding Lily's hand. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I'm fine, Arthur." She looked down at Lily. "Will you come again on Monday?" "Yes." "Good." Celeste squeezed her hand once, then let go and walked toward the house, but she stopped at the door and turned back. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Thank you for bringing her." She disappeared inside before Evan could respond. Arthur approached the car slowly, like he was approaching a bomb that might still detonate. What happened? She told us about her son. She what? Julian. The hospital, the law office, the foundation. It's all about him. She's been grieving for 5 years and she finally told someone. Arthur sat heavily on the edge of the fountain, looking about 100 years older than he had that morning. 5 years, he said quietly. 5 years of watching her disappear into routine and silence, and I couldn't. I tried everything, Mr. Mercer. Therapists, grief counselors, support groups. She fired them all. Said they didn't understand, said grief was private, said she didn't need fixing. She doesn't need fixing, Evan said. She needs to know she's not alone. And your daughter gave her that. Yeah. Apparently shared trauma is the only language Lily speaks fluently these days. Arthur looked at him with something that might have been respect. You understand this changes things. How? Because now that she's started feeling again, she won't be able to stop. And when the pain comes back, when she remembers why she built all those walls in the first place, it's going to be worse than before. Maybe, Evan said, or maybe she'll finally be able to start healing. You're an optimist, Mr. Mercer. No. I'm a desperate single dad who's watching his mute daughter talk to a stranger because they both understand that grief doesn't have a schedule or a cure. If Lily needs Celeste and Celeste needs Lily, I'm not going to interfere. Arthur studied him for a long moment. The previous drivers quit because they couldn't stand the silence, or because they tried to fix her and she rejected them, or because they couldn't handle watching someone slowly disappear. I'm not here to fix anyone, Evan said. I'm just here to drive. Liar? But Arthur said it almost fondly. You care. Despite every instruction I gave you, despite every warning, you care. Yeah, well, caring hasn't exactly worked out great for me lately, so I'm trying not to make it a habit. Too late. Arthur stood, brushing off his impeccable trousers. Monday, same time. And Mr. Mercer? Whatever happens next, don't let her retreat. She'll try. When the grief gets too heavy, when the walls start feeling safer than the world, she'll try to go back to the way things were. Don't let her. How am I supposed to stop her? You won't, but your daughter might. He went back inside, leaving Evan alone with Lily, who was drawing in her sketchpad with fierce concentration. What are you drawing, Ladybug? She held it up, 2 stick figures on swings, one big, one small. Both of them were smiling. That's beautiful, Evan said, his throat tight. It's for her, for when she's sad again. That's really kind of you. Lily went back to coloring. Daddy, am I still broken? The question hit him like a truck. What? No, baby, you were never... I don't talk right. The teachers whisper about me. The other kids think I'm weird. You're not weird. You're grieving. There's a difference. But I talked to her, to Mrs. Hawthorne. It was easy. Why was it easy? Lily thought about this. Because she knows. She knows what it's like when words don't work, when nothing works except being quiet and waiting for it to stop hurting. Evan pulled her into a hug, this small person who'd taught a frozen CEO how to cry again. You're not broken, Lily. You're just learning a different language, and when you're ready, you'll teach me how to speak it too. She hugged him back, and for the first time in 11 months, it didn't feel like holding a ghost. It felt like holding his daughter. The weekend felt different. Evan couldn't explain it, but something had shifted, like the air pressure had changed and his ears hadn't popped yet. He took Lily to the grocery store, to the park, to the library, and watched her move through the world with a lightness that hadn't been there before. She still didn't talk much, a word here, a sentence there, but the silence felt less like a prison and more like a choice. On Saturday afternoon, she asked if they could make cookies for Mrs. Hawthorne. You want to make her cookies? Evan asked, surprised. She's sad. Cookies help when you're sad. It was the kind of logic only a 7-year-old could produce. Simple, direct, and somehow more profound than anything Evan's grief counselor had ever said. So they made chocolate chip cookies from a tube of dough they couldn't really afford, and Lily decorated a paper bag with drawings of swings and houses and stick figures holding hands. Sunday night, Evan lay awake thinking about what Arthur had said. When the pain comes back, it's going to be worse than before. He'd seen it happen with Sarah in those last weeks when the medication stopped working and reality came flooding back. The way hope could be more cruel than despair, because hope required you to keep feeling, keep fighting, keep believing that things could be different. Celeste had spent 5 years building walls to keep the pain out, and now Lily had cracked them open with nothing but honesty and a hug on a playground swing. What happened when those walls came down completely? What happened when Celeste realized that feeling something meant feeling everything? Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of day that made you believe spring might actually come. Lily insisted on wearing her yellow dress, the one Sarah had bought her for Easter 2 years ago, the one she'd refused to touch since the funeral. She carried her cookies in the decorated bag like she was transporting something precious. At 7:45, the gate opened. At 8:12, Celeste emerged from the house. She looked different. Her hair was still pulled back, her suit still impeccable, but something in her face had changed. The ice was gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain, like someone who'd been living in the dark and wasn't sure if the light was salvation or exposure. She got in the car, saw Lily, and stopped. "You wore yellow," Celeste said. "It was Mama's favorite color." "It's beautiful." Lily held out the bag. "I made you cookies. Daddy helped, but I did most of it." Celeste took the bag like it was made of spun glass, looking inside at the slightly burnt cookies and hand-drawn decorations. Her hands trembled. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one's made me cookies in 5 years." "Did Julian like cookies?" The name landed like a depth charge. Evan saw Celeste flinch, saw her face do something complicated, saw her hands tighten on the bag. Then she said, "He loved them, especially chocolate chip. He'd eat the chips out first and leave the rest of the cookie on his plate." "I do that too," Lily said. "I know. I've seen you." They looked at each other, and Evan realized with a start that Celeste had been watching Lily as much as Lily had been watching her. All those weeks of silence in the back seat, both of them had been learning each other's languages, preparing for a conversation neither of them knew how to start. "St. Catherine's," Celeste said, but her voice cracked on the name, and Evan saw her wipe quickly at her eyes. The drive to the hospital was different. Celeste kept glancing at the cookie bag, then at Lily, then out the window like she was trying to memorize the route in a new way. When they arrived, she held out her hand to Lily without speaking. They went inside together, and this time Evan followed. He'd never been inside St. Catherine's East Wing before, had never wanted to see what Celeste did during those 15 minutes, had told himself it was none of his business, that he was just the driver, that caring too much would only hurt. But Lily was in there, and suddenly it was his business. The East Wing was dedicated to pediatric neurology, brain injuries, developmental disorders, children whose neurological systems had betrayed them in ways that required round-the-clock care. Evan saw kids in wheelchairs, kids with feeding tubes, kids whose bodies moved in ways they couldn't control. He saw parents who looked like they'd forgotten how to sleep, how to smile, how to hope for anything beyond making it through the next hour. Celeste walked them to a garden courtyard in the center of the wing, a small outdoor space with benches and flowers and a fountain that burbled peacefully. There was a plaque mounted on the wall, "The Julian Hawthorne Memorial Garden. May children find peace here." "I funded this wing 5 years ago," Celeste said quietly. "I come here every morning and sit in the garden. Sometimes I talk to Julian. Sometimes I just sit. The nurses think I'm praying, but I'm not. I'm just trying to remember what he sounded like, what he smelled like, the way he'd throw his arms around my neck and squeeze like he was trying to become part of me." She sat on one of the benches. Lily sat beside her, and Evan hung back, giving them space. "I was terrified of him," Celeste continued, "after the fall. Terrified of his seizures, his outbursts, the way he'd scream, and I wouldn't know why. Terrified that I was failing him every single day. Terrified that loving him wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough, that no matter what I did, I was making everything worse." "My daddy's scared too," Lily said. "He thinks I don't know, but I hear him crying at night, after he thinks I'm asleep." Evan's chest tightened. He'd thought he'd been quiet. He'd thought he'd been protecting her from seeing how completely he was falling apart. But of course, she knew. Children always knew. "Being a parent is terrifying," Celeste said, "because you love this small person more than you love yourself. And you absolutely know that you're going to fail them somehow, that you're going to make the wrong choice, say the wrong thing, miss the moment that mattered. And you have to live with that knowledge every single day. But you tried, Lily said. You built him a garden. You help other kids. That counts. Does it? Celeste's voice broke. Does it count if I sent him away? If I chose my company over my son? If I told myself he'd be better off with professionals when really I was just relieved? Relieved that someone else would handle the hard parts, the scary parts, the parts that required me to be more patient and present than I knew how to be. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, and Lily reached over and took her hand. My mama chose to die, Lily said. She could have tried more treatments, but they hurt too much. She said it was time to go, and Daddy got so angry, he yelled at the doctors, at the nurses, at Mama. He said she was giving up. She said she was letting go. I don't know who was right. Evan felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He'd thought Lily had been asleep during that argument. He'd thought he'd protected her from seeing him at his worst, desperate and furious and begging Sarah not to leave them. But Lily had heard everything. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Celeste said. It's okay. Grown-ups get scared too, they just pretend they don't. They sat in the garden for 25 minutes instead of 15. When they finally returned to the car, both of them looked wrung out, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion and everything to do with emotional excavation. Morrison and Vance, Celeste said. At the law office, Celeste was inside for 45 minutes instead of 20. When she emerged, she was carrying a different folder, thicker than usual, with what looked like legal documents visible through the transparent sleeve. She got in the car and sat heavily. I just filed paperwork to change the foundation's mission statement, she said to no one in particular. My lawyers think I'm having a breakdown. Are you? Evan asked. Probably, but maybe that's not a bad thing. At the construction site, Celeste and Lily stood at the fence together. Evan watched them through the windshield, two figures in dramatically different sizes, both staring at the skeleton of a building that represented something Evan was only beginning to understand. It was supposed to open 2 years ago, Celeste said when they returned. But I kept changing the plans, adding more features, demanding perfection. My board says I'm wasting money on sentiment, that rehabilitation centers should be functional, not beautiful, that children don't need art therapy rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows and gardens on the roof. But Julian would have needed those things, Lily said. Yes, he would have. Then the board is wrong. Celeste smiled, an actual smile that transformed her entire face. You're absolutely right. At the bank, Celeste asked Lily to wait in the car. This part isn't appropriate for children, she said. It's very boring and very political, and I'm about to make some people very angry. She was inside for an hour and 15 minutes. Through the glass doors, Evan could see security being called, could see men in expensive suits gesticulating wildly, could see Celeste standing perfectly still in the middle of the chaos, her expression carved from stone. When she finally emerged, she looked like she'd been through a war. I quit, she said, getting into the car. Evan nearly crashed into a parking meter. You what? I resigned as CEO, effective immediately. I'm liquidating my personal shares and putting everything into the foundation. My board will have to find someone else to bully into prioritizing profit over people. She said it calmly, like she'd just ordered coffee instead of detonating her entire career. Mrs. Hawthorne, are you sure? No, I'm not sure about anything. But I'm done making decisions based on fear. She looked at Lily. Your father asked me once if I was having a breakdown. I think I am. I think I've been having one for 5 years, and I'm only just now realizing it. What are you going to do? Evan asked. I have no idea, but I'm going to figure it out somewhere other than that boardroom with people other than those vultures. They drove back to Hawthorne Lane in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, not empty and frozen, but full of possibility and terror in equal measure. Arthur was waiting with an expression that suggested he'd already heard the news. Mrs. Hawthorne, the board president, called. He's threatening legal action. He says you violated your fiduciary duty. He says, let him say whatever he wants, Arthur. I'm done listening to men who think money is the only thing that matters. But the company will survive without me.
It always has. I was just a figurehead anyway, a name on the letterhead to give the shareholders confidence. She walked toward the house, then stopped. Arthur, how many people does this house employ? Including groundskeepers and kitchen staff? 14.
And how many rooms?
43.
And how many people live here?
Arthur's voice was very quiet.
2, ma'am.
That's obscene. She looked back at the house, this enormous monument to wealth and isolation. I want you to find me a real estate agent, someone who specializes in estates. I'm selling it. Ma'am, this house has been in your family for 3 generations, and it's been a mausoleum for at least one of them. I don't want to live in a museum anymore, Arthur. I want to live in a home. She went inside before he could argue. Arthur turned to Evan, his expression shell-shocked. She's having a complete breakdown. Maybe, Evan said, or maybe she's finally having a breakthrough.
There's a difference? Ask me in a month. That night, Evan's phone rang at 9 o'clock. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Mercer? Arthur's voice, tight with urgency. I need you to come to the estate, now.
What's wrong? Is Lily... Your daughter is fine. It's Mrs. Hawthorne. I don't know how to describe it.
She's in the East Wing, and she won't come out, and she's been in there for hours. I'm worried she might... I'll be there in 30 minutes. Evan called Mrs. Chen, begged her to watch Lily even though it was late, and drove to Hawthorne Lane with his heart in his throat. The service gate was open, and Arthur met him at the door, looking more disheveled than Evan had ever seen him. She went up to Julian's room after dinner, Arthur said. It's been sealed since he died. I told her it wasn't a good idea, but she insisted. That was 4 hours ago. He led Evan up 3 flights of stairs, through corridors that felt like they went on forever, to a door at the end of the East Wing. Light spilled out from underneath. Evan knocked. Mrs. Hawthorne? It's Evan Mercer. No response. I'm coming in. The room was exactly what Evan expected, and somehow worse. It was a child's room frozen in time, toys on shelves, books on the nightstand, posters on the walls. But everything was too neat, too perfect, arranged like a museum display of childhood rather than a place where an actual child had lived. Celeste sat on the floor in the middle of the room, surrounded by photo albums and stuffed animals and clothes that still smelled faintly of detergent from 5 years ago. Her makeup was smudged, her hair had come loose from its severe bun, and she was clutching a small blue blanket like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to earth. His favorite blanket, she said without looking up. He called it BB. Wouldn't sleep without it. When I sent him to the facility, I forgot to pack it. He cried for 3 days straight. They called and told me, and I said he'd have to learn to sleep without it, that it was better for him to not be dependent on objects for comfort. Her voice cracked. He was 6 years old, and I told him he couldn't have his blanket. Evan sat down on the floor beside her, careful to keep his distance. You were doing what you thought was right. I was doing what was easy. There's a difference. She ran her fingers over the worn fabric. I thought if I sealed this room, if I stopped looking at his things, the pain would go away, but it didn't. It just calcified, turned into this hard, frozen thing in my chest that I carried everywhere. And I told myself I was functional, I was fine, I was managing my grief in a healthy way. You were surviving, Evan said. Sometimes that's all you can do. But surviving isn't living, is it? She looked at him finally, her eyes red and raw. I've been surviving for 5 years, going through the motions, visiting the places that remind me of my failure. Throwing money at foundations and hospitals and lawyers like that would somehow absolve me. But it doesn't. It just keeps me moving, keeps me from having to sit still long enough to actually feel what I've lost. And now you're feeling it. And it's unbearable. She pressed the blanket to her face. How did you do it, Mr. Mercer? How did you survive losing your wife without turning into a ghost? I didn't, Evan said honestly. I became a ghost for a while. I'm still a ghost some days. The only thing that keeps me human is Lily, and even that doesn't always work. But she's talking now. She's healing. Because she found someone who understood her grief better than I did. Because you gave her permission to be broken without apologizing for it. Celeste looked at him for a long moment. I need to tell you something. About why I really hired you. Evan's stomach dropped. Okay?
I've had 12 drivers in 5 years, 12 people who couldn't last more than a few weeks because they either tried to fix me or couldn't handle watching me disappear.
When I saw your application, when Arthur told me you were a widower with a young daughter, I almost rejected it immediately. I thought you'd be the worst possible choice. Too much shared trauma, too much potential for emotional entanglement. So why did you hire me? Because I was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of performing, tired of pretending I was fine. And I thought maybe, if I hired someone who understood loss, they'd just let me be. They wouldn't try to save me. They'd just drive the route and collect their paycheck and leave me alone with my grief. But then Lily showed up. Celeste echoed. And she looked at me with those eyes that have seen too much. And she spoke to me in the language of shared trauma. And she cracked me open. This 7-year-old child saw through every wall I'd built and decided I was worth saving anyway. She doesn't think she's saving you, Evan said. She thinks you're saving each other. Celeste made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Smart child. The smartest. She gets it from her mother. They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the remnants of a childhood cut short, both of them carrying losses too heavy to name. Then Celeste said, I'm going to open the foundation, the rehabilitation center. I'm going to make it exactly what Julian needed, and I'm going to dedicate every remaining dollar I have to making sure other families don't have to make the choice I made. That's a good plan, but I can't do it alone. I'm good at money and terrible at people. I need someone who understands what families actually need, someone who's lived through the fear and the doctor's appointments and the desperate hope that somehow, some way, things will get better. You need a parent who's been in the trenches. Yes. She turned to face him fully. I need you. Evan blinked. Me? I need someone who can tell me when I'm being too clinical, too detached, too focused on metrics instead of humans. I need someone who will fight for the families when I start thinking like a CEO instead of a person. I need... She trailed off, and Evan finished the sentence for her. You need someone who won't let you retreat back into the ice. Yes. Mrs. Hawthorne, Celeste. I'm not qualified for whatever position you're describing. I'm a dropout who couldn't keep a job at a temp agency. I have no experience with foundations or nonprofits or anything except failing at providing for my daughter. You kept her alive. You kept yourself alive. You showed up every day even when hope felt impossible. That's not failure, Mr. Mercer. That's the kind of resilience I need on my team. What would I even do? Whatever needs doing, family liaison, program consultant, professional reality checker. I don't care about the title. I care about having someone who'll tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Evan looked around the room, at the toys and books and photos of a boy who never got to grow up, at the woman sitting on the floor holding a blanket, finally allowing herself to break. Okay, he said, but I have conditions. Name them. Lily comes to work with me when she needs to. No questions, no judgment. She's part of the package. Done. I don't wear a suit unless absolutely necessary. I've worn this thing for 8 weeks and I'm pretty sure it's developed sentience. A ghost of a smile. Agreed. And you have to promise me that if you start retreating, if you start building those walls again, you'll let Lily or me or someone call you on it. Because the world needs the version of you that's sitting on this floor crying over a blanket. Not the ice statue who spends 5 years visiting the same 4 places without ever actually healing. Celeste was quiet for a long moment. Then she held out her hand. Deal. They shook on it, 2 broken people agreeing to try being human together. Arthur appeared in the doorway, his expression relieved. Is everything... I'm fine, Arthur, Celeste said. Mr. Mercer is going to need an office. Something with windows and access to the kitchen, and we'll need to convert the library into a family resource center. Can you start making arrangements? Ma'am, it's nearly midnight. Then start in the morning, but start. She stood, still holding the blanket, and looked around the room one last time. I'm going to donate most of this to the center, so other children can play with Julian's toys, use his books, know that he existed and mattered and made the world a little bit better just by being in it. That's beautiful, Evan said. No, it's terrifying, but I'm doing it anyway." She walked out of the room, leaving the door open behind her. Arthur escorted Evan back downstairs, his expression complicated.
"You realize what you've agreed to?" "Not even slightly. She's going to transform that foundation into something massive, something that will require every hour of every day, something that will consume her completely. Better than being consumed by grief." "Perhaps." Arthur paused at the door. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer, for not trying to fix her, for just being present while she fixed herself." "I didn't do anything. You brought your daughter. That was everything." Evan drove home through empty streets, his mind spinning. He'd come to this job desperate and broke, looking for a paycheck and nothing else. And somehow he'd ended up here, agreeing to help a grieving CEO build a foundation dedicated to the son she couldn't save. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was exactly what both of them needed. When he got home, Mrs. Chen was waiting with a knowing smile. "Your daughter, she is special," she said. "She tells me tonight that she is going to help sad people feel better. I think maybe she is already doing this, yes?" "Yeah," Evan said. "I think maybe she is." Lily was asleep in her bed, her sketch pad on the pillow beside her. Evan looked at the latest drawing, 3 stick figures standing in front of a building. One tall, one medium, one small. All of them were smiling. Underneath, in Lily's careful handwriting, "Our new family." Evan sat on the edge of her bed and watched her sleep, this small person who'd survived losing her mother and somehow still had enough heart to help someone else survive losing her son. Maybe neither of them was as broken as he'd thought. Maybe they were just learning how to build something new from the pieces. The news hit 3 days later like a sledgehammer wrapped in legalese. Evan was in his new office, which wasn't really an office so much as a converted sitting room with a desk Arthur had dragged in from somewhere, trying to make sense of foundation bylaws when Celeste appeared in the doorway. Her face was the color of old paper. "We have a problem," she said. Lily looked up from where she was drawing on the floor. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves lawyers and reporters and the complete destruction of everything we're trying to build." Celeste handed Evan a newspaper, her hands shaking. "The city council approved a development project last night, commercial zoning for luxury condos. 200 families are being evicted to make room for it." Evan scanned the article, his stomach dropping with each paragraph. The development was in Riverside, the neighborhood where he and Sarah had lived before they'd scraped together enough for their current apartment, where Mrs. Chen still lived, where half the families from Patterson Elementary called home, where people who'd helped them through Sarah's hospice care still lived, still struggled, still held each other up through disasters, both personal and municipal. "When?" he asked. "Evictions start in 60 days. Construction begins in 90. "Can they do that? Just kick people out?" "They already did. The vote was 7-2. The development company promised jobs and tax revenue and revitalization. The council called it progress." Evan kept reading, and then he saw it. The name at the bottom of the article listed as the primary development company, Hawthorne Industries. His head snapped up. "Your company is doing this?" "My former company," Celeste said, her voice hollow. "I resigned 3 days ago. Apparently the board wasted no time moving forward with projects I'd been blocking for months." "You knew about this?" "I knew they wanted to develop Riverside. I said no. I said we had enough luxury properties, that the city needed affordable housing, that displacing 200 families for profit was unconscionable. They told me I was being emotional, irrational, that I was letting personal grief interfere with sound business decisions. So they waited until you left and pushed it through anyway." "Yes." She sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. "And now my name is on it. My family's name. The same name that's supposed to represent healing and hope and second chances for families in crisis. Instead, it's going to represent throwing people out of their homes to build condos that start at $800,000. Lily had stopped drawing. "That's not fair." "No," Celeste agreed. "It's not." Evan's mind was racing. 200 families, 60 days. Mrs. Chen, who'd fled one country already and couldn't survive fleeing another. The Rodriguez family on the second floor who had a son with cerebral palsy and couldn't afford to move somewhere without accessible housing.
The elderly couple in 3C who'd lived in the same apartment for 40 years and would probably die before they'd let anyone force them out. "We have to stop it," he said. "I can't. I have no authority anymore, no influence. The board made very clear that my resignation meant forfeiting any say in company decisions." "But you own shares, right? You have voting power?" "I liquidated everything, put it all into the foundation. I have nothing left except what I'd already set aside for the rehabilitation center." Evan stared at her. "You gave up your entire fortune." "Yes." "For the foundation." "Yes." "And now the company you built is going to destroy the neighborhood that helped my family survive my wife's death, and you can't do anything about it because you gave away all your leverage." Celeste flinched like he'd slapped her. "I didn't know they'd move this fast. I thought I'd have time to establish the foundation, to create something good before they—" She stopped, pressing her palms against her eyes. "You're right. I was naive. I thought resigning would be enough. I thought they'd respect the Hawthorne name enough to not—" "They don't care about your name," Evan interrupted, surprised by the anger in his voice. "They care about profit. You knew that. You spent decades working with these people. How could you not see this coming?" "Because I was too busy trying to save myself," Celeste's voice cracked. "Because I was so focused on trying to make up for failing Julian that I didn't think about what my resignation would cost everyone else. I was selfish. Again. Just like I was selfish when I sent Julian away, when I chose my career over my son, when I built walls instead of asking for help." "Stop." Lily's voice cut through the room like a knife. She stood up, her small fists clenched at her sides. "Stop saying you're bad. You're not bad. You made a mistake." "This isn't a mistake, sweetheart. This is 200 families losing their homes because the bad people are doing bad things," Lily said firmly. "You didn't make them do it. They chose to, and now we have to choose to stop them." Celeste and Evan both stared at her. "How?" Evan asked. Lily looked at him like the answer was obvious. "We tell everyone. We tell them what the company is doing. We tell them Mrs. Hawthorne doesn't want this. We tell them there's a better way. That's called public relations, Ladybug. It doesn't actually stop evictions. But it makes people pay attention, and when people pay attention, they get mad, and when they get mad, they fight back." She turned to Celeste. "You said the vote was 7-2. That means 2 people voted no. Why?" Celeste blinked, clearly thrown by being interrogated by a 7-year-old. I don't know. I haven't looked at who—" "Then look. Because if 2 people voted no, maybe they'll help us. Maybe they know other people who'll help us. Maybe we can make the 7 people who voted yes change their minds." Evan felt something like hope flicker in his chest. "She's right. We need allies. We need to make enough noise that the council can't ignore us." "I don't know how to make noise," Celeste said quietly. "I've spent 5 years being silent." "Then it's time to get loud." Evan pulled out his phone, already composing a text to Mrs. Chen. "I need a list of everyone in Riverside who's organizing against this. Every tenant association, every community group, every angry neighbor with a phone and an opinion." "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to introduce them to Celeste Hawthorne. The real one. Not the CEO who abandoned them, but the mother who understands what it's like to lose everything and have nowhere to go." Celeste went pale. "They'll hate me." "Probably, at first. But then we're going to show them what you're building. We're going to tell them about Julian, about the foundation, about how you're trying to create the exact kind of support system that Riverside families need. And we're going to ask them to help us fight the company that stole your name." "That's not a plan. That's a prayer. Right now, it's all we've got." The meeting happened in the basement of St. Mary's Church on Saturday morning, the same church where Sarah's funeral had been held, where Evan had stood in front of people he barely knew and tried to explain how someone so vital could just stop existing. Walking through those doors again felt like stepping into a grave, but Lily held his hand, and Celeste walked beside them with her spine straight and her expression terrified, and together they descended into a room full of angry people who had every right to hate them. There were maybe 50 people crammed into the space, parents with babies on their hips, elderly couples holding hands, teenagers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else but understood this was about their future. Mrs. Chen was there, sitting in the front row with her arms crossed. The Rodriguez family was there, their son's wheelchair taking up extra space. People Evan recognized from the grocery store, the bus stop, the playground where he'd watched Lily forget how to smile. At the front of the room stood a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd fought 1,000 battles and was prepared to fight 1,000 more. "I'm Gloria Martinez," she said, her voice carrying easily. "I've lived in Riverside for 32 years. I raised 3 children in my apartment. I buried my husband from this church, and I will be damned if some corporate vultures are going to take my home so they can build luxury condos for people who think $800,000 is a reasonable price for 2 bedrooms. The room erupted in agreement. "We've got 60 days before evictions start," Gloria continued. 60 days to find new housing, new schools, new lives, because Hawthorne Industries decided our neighborhood is worth more empty than full. So here's what we're going to do." "Excuse me." Celeste's voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. Gloria turned, her expression hardening when she saw who'd spoken. "You've got some nerve showing up here." "I know, but I need you to listen." "Why should we listen to you? You're a Hawthorne. Your company is destroying our lives." "It's not my company anymore. I resigned. And the reason they're doing this, the reason they waited until I left, is because I've been blocking this project for 8 months. Suspicious murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gloria's eyes narrowed. "You expect us to believe you're on our side?" "No." "I expect you to hate me. I expect you to be furious that someone with my name and resources let this happen. I expect you to want to throw me out of this church and never let me forget that I failed you." Celeste's voice was shaking, but she didn't look away. "But I'm asking you to let me try to make it right." "How?" "You just said you resigned. You have no power." "I have money. Not as much as I used to, but enough. Enough to hire the best lawyers in the city. Enough to file injunctions and appeals and whatever legal obstacles we can throw at this development. Enough to make this fight expensive enough that Hawthorne Industries thinks twice about proceeding." "Money doesn't stop evictions," someone shouted from the back. "We've seen rich people make promises before. They never keep them." "You're right," Celeste said. "So I'm not making promises. I'm making a commitment. Every dollar I have left goes to fighting this. And if we lose, if the evictions go through anyway, every displaced family gets priority placement in the affordable housing units I'm building on the foundation property." The room went silent. "What affordable housing?" Gloria asked. "The Hawthorne Foundation was going to be a rehabilitation center for children with traumatic injuries. And it still will be. But half the building, half the property, is going to be dedicated to affordable family housing, subsidized rent, access to medical care and therapy, and educational support. Everything families need to not just survive, but actually live." She pulled out a folder, the same folder she'd been carrying for weeks, and handed it to Gloria. "The blueprints, the budget, the timeline, it's all there. And if you help me stop these evictions, if you let me fight alongside you instead of against you, I'll dedicate the entire project to making sure what happened to Riverside never happens again." Gloria flipped through the documents, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. "Why? Why do you care? You could take your money and disappear, build your foundation somewhere else. Forget Riverside ever existed." "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," Celeste said. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I know what it's like to watch your life fall apart while everyone tells you to just move on, just adapt. Just accept that sometimes people lose, and there's nothing you can do about it. I know what it's like to be abandoned by the systems that are supposed to protect you. And I absolutely refuse to let that happen to anyone else if I can stop it." Lily walked up to the front and took Celeste's hand. "Her little boy died," she said to the room. "And nobody helped her. But she's going to help you, because that's what people do when they're brave." The silence was deafening. Then Mrs. Chen stood up. "I know this man," she said, pointing at Evan. "His wife died. Cancer. Very bad. Very painful. Our neighborhood, we help him. We watch his daughter. We bring food. We make sure he is not alone." She looked at Celeste. "You help our neighborhood now?" "Yes." "You fight the company?" "Yes." "You promise?" Celeste's voice was steady. "I promise." Mrs. Chen nodded once, then sat back down. Gloria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said,
We meet again tomorrow, same time. Bring your lawyers, bring your blueprints, bring proof that you're serious about this. And if we're satisfied, if we believe you're actually going to fight instead of just making yourself feel better, then we'll let you join us. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be ugly.
Hawthorne Industries has more money and lawyers than we could ever dream of.
The odds of us winning are basically zero. Then we're evenly matched, Celeste said, because the odds of me giving up are zero too. The ghost of a smile crossed Gloria's face. All right then, let's see what you've got. The next 6 weeks were a blur of legal filings and community meetings and late nights spent strategizing with lawyers who looked at the case and said it was unwinnable and then went to work anyway because Celeste was paying them enough to make impossible seem worth attempting. Evan became the liaison between Celeste's legal team and the Riverside families, translating legalese into plain English, making sure everyone understood what was happening, keeping people informed and engaged even when the news was bad, which it usually was. Hawthorne Industries countered every legal challenge with 3 more of their own.
They had an army of lawyers and unlimited resources and absolutely no shame about using both to crush opposition. They filed motions to dismiss, motions to expedite, motions to do things Evan didn't even understand but knew were designed to make fighting back as painful and expensive as possible. The media picked up the story. Hawthorne heiress fights former company, made for good headlines. And suddenly, Celeste was everywhere. Radio interviews, news segments, op-eds in papers that normally wouldn't give Riverside 2 paragraphs of coverage. And she didn't hide. Didn't retreat into carefully crafted PR statements or let lawyers speak for her. She showed up at every community meeting, every city council session, every protest that Gloria organized. She stood in front of cameras and reporters and angry residents and told them about Julian, about her failure, about how she was trying to build something better from the wreckage of her grief. Some people believed her. Some people didn't, but everyone paid attention. The city council meeting 3 weeks before the eviction deadline was standing room only. Evan stood in the back with Lily on his shoulders so she could see, while Celeste sat in the front row next to Gloria and the Riverside legal team. One by one, residents stood to speak. Mrs. Chen talked about fleeing Vietnam and finding safety in Riverside. The Rodriguez family talked about their son's medical needs and how moving would disrupt his care. A teenage girl talked about her school, her friends, her life that was about to be ripped apart for profit. Then Celeste stood up. "My name is Celeste Hawthorne," she said, "and I'm here to tell you that this development is built on a lie." The room went silent. Hawthorne Industries claims this project will revitalize Riverside, that it will bring jobs and tax revenue and economic growth, but that's not true. What it will bring is displacement, gentrification, the destruction of a community that has survived everything this city has thrown at it. She pulled out a document. This is the internal memo from Hawthorne Industries' board of directors. It projects that 90% of the construction jobs will go to workers from outside the neighborhood, that the commercial spaces will be priced so high that local businesses can't afford them, that the tax revenue will be partially offset by the cost of social services for displaced families. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The council members looked uncomfortable. "How did you get that?" one of them asked. "I built that company. I know where they keep their secrets, and I'm here to make sure everyone else knows them too." Celeste's voice was steady, clear, devastating. "You were sold a promise of progress. What you're actually getting is profit. My former company is going to make billions from this development, and Riverside is going to pay the price." She turned to face the council directly. "I'm asking you to reverse your decision. I'm asking you to stand with the families who built this neighborhood instead of the corporation trying to destroy it, and I'm offering an alternative." She nodded to Evan, who pulled up the presentation they'd spent the last week preparing. Images of the foundation building filled the screen. The rehabilitation center, the affordable housing units, the community spaces and gardens and playgrounds. "The Hawthorne Foundation is breaking ground in 4 months," Celeste said. "We're creating 120 affordable housing units with access to medical care, therapy, and educational support. We're building a rehabilitation center that will serve children from across the city. We're creating jobs, real jobs, permanent jobs, jobs that go to people who actually live in this community." She looked at each council member in turn. "You have a choice. You can approve a luxury development that serves wealthy outsiders and destroys a neighborhood. Or you can support a project that serves the people who actually live here. That builds up instead of tearing down. That chooses people over profit. The council president cleared his throat. Mrs. Hawthorne, while we appreciate your passion, the development contract has already been signed. Reversing it would expose the city to legal liability. Then let Hawthorne Industries sue, Celeste interrupted. Let them explain in court why profit is more important than people. Let them defend displacing 200 families to build condos that 99% of this city can't afford. I'll personally fund the city's legal defense. That's not how municipal contracts work. Then change how they work. Gloria was on her feet now. You sit up there and tell us we have to accept this because of contracts and procedures and legal technicalities. But what about our rights? What about our homes? What about our lives? The crowd erupted in agreement, chanting, shouting, demanding to be heard. The council president banged his gavel, calling for order, but the room had moved beyond order. This was anger finding its voice. This was people who'd been ignored and dismissed and told to accept their displacement, finally saying no, we will not go quietly, we will not make this easy, we will fight. Evan felt Lily's hand tighten on his shoulder. He looked up and saw her watching Celeste with an expression of pure awe. She's doing it, Lily whispered. She's being brave. The meeting went on for 3 more hours. The council heard testimony from residents, lawyers, advocates, and finally, reluctantly, agreed to table the eviction timeline pending further legal review. It wasn't a victory, but it was a delay. And delays meant time. Time to organize. Time to fight. Time to find another way. Outside the building, reporters swarmed Celeste, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in her face, questions coming from every direction. Mrs. Hawthorne, do you regret resigning from the company? Mrs. Hawthorne, is this about your son? Mrs. Hawthorne, what do you say to people who think you're just trying to buy redemption? She stood in the center of the chaos, and for just a moment, Evan saw her falter, saw the Ice Queen trying to rebuild her walls, trying to retreat into the safety of silence. Then Lily ran forward and grabbed her hand. Celeste looked down at this small person who'd cracked her open and refused to let her stay broken, who'd taught her that being vulnerable wasn't weakness, that feeling everything was better than feeling nothing, that some fights were worth the pain. This isn't about redemption, Celeste said to the cameras. This is about refusing to let other people pay for my mistakes. This is about building something that matters. And yes, it's about my son, because he deserved better than what I gave him. And every child in Riverside deserves better than what Hawthorne Industries is trying to give them. She squeezed Lily's hand. I spent 5 years hiding from my grief, 5 years visiting the same places, driving the same route, performing the same ritual of remembrance without ever actually healing. And then this child, she gestured to Lily, showed me that grief doesn't have to be a prison, that you can be broken and still be brave, that sometimes the only way through the pain is to stop running from it. The reporters were scribbling frantically. This was good television, good copy, the kind of story that humanized corporate battles and made people care about municipal zoning. So here's what I'm going to do, Celeste continued. I'm going to fight Hawthorne Industries with everything I have. I'm going to use my name, my money, and my knowledge of how they operate to make sure they can't destroy Riverside without consequences. And I'm going to build the foundation my son deserved. Not as penance, not as redemption, but as a promise that his life, his short, difficult, beautiful life, meant something. She turned and walked away, still holding Lily's hand, leaving the reporters to chase after her with questions she wasn't going to answer. Evan caught up to them at the car. That was incredible. That was terrifying, Celeste corrected. I just made myself a target. Hawthorne Industries is going to come after me with everything they have. Let them. We're ready. Are we? She looked at him with exhausted eyes. Because I'm not sure I am. I'm not sure I can sustain this. The fighting, the publicity, the constant reminder of everything I did wrong. You're not doing it alone, Evan said. That's the point. You've got Gloria and the Riverside families. You've got your legal team. You've got me. And you've got Lily. Lily nodded seriously. I'm very helpful. Celeste laughed, an actual laugh that sounded rusty from disuse but real. Yes, You are very helpful. They drove back to Hawthorne Lane in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. When they arrived, Arthur was waiting with an expression that suggested either very good or very bad news. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said carefully, "the board president called. He wants to meet with you, tomorrow morning. He says it's urgent." Celeste's expression hardened. "Tell him I'm busy." He said if you don't meet with him, they'll accelerate the eviction timeline. Of course he did. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. Fine. Set it up. But I want Evan there, and I want our lawyers on standby. Ma'am, are you sure that's wise? The board president specifically requested a private conversation, and I specifically don't trust him. Evan comes. End of discussion. The meeting was held at a restaurant so expensive, Evan was pretty sure his shoes violated the dress code. The board president, a man named Richard Castellane, who looked like he'd been born wearing a suit, sat at a corner table with a glass of scotch, and an expression that suggested he was accustomed to getting his way. "Celeste," he said, not standing. "Thank you for coming." "Let's skip the pleasantries, Richard. What do you want?" "I want to make you an offer." He gestured to the empty chairs. "Please, sit." They sat. Evan felt wildly out of place in his thrift store blazer, while Celeste looked perfectly comfortable in the kind of power suit that cost more than his truck. Richard leaned back in his chair. "You've made quite the spectacle of yourself these past few weeks. Very dramatic, very emotional. The board is concerned." "Concerned about what? That I'm telling the truth about your development project?" "Concerned that you're damaging the Hawthorne name. Your family built this company over 3 generations. Your grandfather would be horrified to see you dragging the name through the mud for some misguided crusade." "My grandfather," Celeste said coldly, "died before I could tell him about Julian, so I'm not particularly interested in his hypothetical opinions." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Here's my offer. Drop the fight against the Riverside development. Stop talking to the press. Issue a statement saying you support the company's decision and that you were mistaken in your earlier opposition. And in return? In return, the board will donate $5 million to your foundation. Unrestricted funds. Use it however you want." Evan's breath caught. $5 million. That was more than the foundation's current entire budget. That could fund the rehabilitation center for years, could build twice as many housing units, could... "No," Celeste said. Richard blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said no." "Celeste, that's $5 million. Think about what you could do with that kind of funding." "I am thinking about it. I'm thinking about the strings attached. I'm thinking about how accepting that money would make me complicit in destroying Riverside. I'm thinking about standing in front of those families and telling them I sold them out for a donation." "You're being unreasonable." "I'm being consistent, something you might try." Richard's expression hardened. "Then let me be equally consistent. If you continue this fight, the board will pursue legal action against you for violating your severance agreement. We'll tie up your assets, freeze the foundation's funding, and make sure you can't afford to fight us even if you wanted to." "My lawyers reviewed that agreement. I didn't violate anything." "Lawyers can argue anything, and we have more lawyers than you could ever afford." He leaned forward. "You can't win this, Celeste. The development is happening. The evictions are happening. All you're doing is making it painful for everyone involved. Take the money. Build your foundation. Let Riverside go." Celeste stood up. "No. You're going to regret this." "Probably. But I'll regret it less than abandoning those families." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Richard? The memo I mentioned at the council meeting? The one about projected tax revenue and employment figures? I have copies, lots of copies, and if you try to freeze my assets or interfere with the foundation, I'll release them to every media outlet in the state." Richard's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I? You know what I did at that company for 20 years. You know what access I had, what files I could have copied before I left, what secrets I know." She smiled, and it was terrifying. "You taught me to play hardball, Richard. Don't be surprised when I use what I learned." She walked out without looking back. Evan followed, his heart hammering. "Did you actually copy files?" "Maybe, maybe not. But he doesn't know, and that's enough." Celeste, if you violated your severance agreement, I didn't. Everything I took was legally mine. Notes from meetings I attended, documents I created, memos I was copied on, all technically my intellectual property. That's a technicality. Yes, and technicalities are the only thing people like Richard understand. They got in the car. Evan drove. And about 3 blocks away from the restaurant, Celeste started shaking. "Pull over," she said. Evan pulled into a parking lot. Celeste got out and stood in the cold air, breathing hard, her perfect composure cracking like ice under pressure. "I just threatened the board president of a multi-billion-dollar corporation," she said. "I just backed myself into a corner where my only option is to win or lose everything. Yeah. I'm terrified. Yeah. What if I can't do this? What if I'm making promises I can't keep? What if I'm about to fail another 200 families the same way I failed Julian?" Evan got out of the car and stood beside her. "You probably will fail, at least partially. Some of those families are probably going to lose their homes no matter what we do. The legal system is broken. The city council is corrupt. Hawthorne Industries has infinite resources. The odds are terrible. That's not helpful. But," Evan continued, "you're still fighting. You're using every advantage you have, your name, your knowledge, your money, to make this as hard as possible for them. You're showing those families that someone with power actually gives a damn about what happens to them. And even if we lose, even if the evictions go through, you're building something that will help them rebuild. That's not failure, Celeste. That's the opposite of failure." She looked at him with red eyes. "How are you so calm about this?" "I'm not calm. I'm terrified too. But I've already lost the worst thing I could lose. Sarah's gone. Nothing that happens with Hawthorne Industries can hurt worse than that. So I might as well fight for something that matters." Celeste was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not letting me quit. For answering a job that nobody wanted. For bringing Lily. For seeing me as something other than a frozen CEO who needed fixing. You didn't need fixing. You needed a reason to start living again. I think I'm still figuring out how." "That's okay. So am I." They stood in the parking lot as the sun set, 2 broken people trying to build something good from the wreckage, and neither of them was sure if it would work, but both of them were sure it was worth trying. The call came at 2 in the morning. Evan jolted awake to his phone buzzing against the nightstand, his heart already racing because nothing good happened at 2 a.m. Nothing except emergencies and disasters and the kind of news that changed everything. "Mr. Mercer?" Arthur's voice was tight. "You need to come to the estate. Now. It's Mrs. Hawthorne." Evan was in his truck before Arthur finished the sentence, Mrs. Chen appearing at her door in a bathrobe before he could even knock, already nodding that yes, she'd watch Lily. Go. Hurry. The drive to Hawthorne Lane took 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours. Evan's mind cycled through every possible catastrophe. Celeste had hurt herself. The board had done something. The fight had become too much and she'd retreated back into that frozen shell where no one could reach her. Arthur met him at the door, his usual composure shattered. "She's in the garden, Julian's garden. She's been there since midnight. She won't come inside. She won't speak to me. I thought perhaps—" "I'll go." The hospital garden was exactly as Evan remembered from weeks ago. Peaceful, carefully maintained, designed to offer comfort to families living through the worst moments of their lives. Celeste sat on the bench where she and Lily had first really talked, still wearing the clothes from the restaurant meeting, looking like she'd forgotten how to move. "Celeste." She didn't respond, just stared at the fountain, at the plaque with Julian's name, at the space where her son's memory lived in bronze letters and manicured flowers. Evan sat beside her and waited. He'd learned that sometimes silence was the only language that mattered, that pushing for words when someone was drowning only made them sink faster. After a long time, Celeste spoke. "I came here to tell him I was sorry, to explain what I was doing, to ask for, I don't know, permission, forgiveness, some sign that fighting for Riverside was the right choice. And he's dead. He's been dead for 5 years. He can't give me permission or forgiveness or anything except silence." Her voice cracked. "I've been talking to a ghost, Evan, driving the same route, visiting the same places, having the same conversation with someone who isn't there. And I thought if I just did it long enough, if I just kept trying, eventually it would feel like enough, like I'd paid my debt, like I could move on. But it doesn't work that way. No, it doesn't. She turned to look at him, her face devastated. What if I'm wrong? What if fighting Hawthorne Industries is just another way to avoid accepting that I failed Julian? What if I'm using these families as a substitute for the son I couldn't save? Are you? I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I thought I was being brave, thought I was finally doing something right. But Richard was right. I can't win this. Hawthorne Industries is too big, too powerful, too entrenched. All I'm doing is dragging it out, making it painful. Maybe I should just accept the money and let them have Riverside. You don't believe that. I don't know what I believe. Celeste pressed her hands to her face. I'm so tired, Evan. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of feeling everything. I'm tired of trying to be human when being frozen was so much easier. Evan understood that exhaustion bone deep. He'd felt it in the hospice, watching Sarah waste away. He'd felt it in the months after, when getting out of bed felt like climbing Everest. He'd felt it every time Lily looked at him with those silent, grieving eyes, and he had no idea how to help her. You know what Sarah told me? He said quietly. 2 days before she died. She said she was tired of fighting too. Tired of treatments that didn't work and hope that turned out to be false, and everyone telling her to stay positive when her body was actively destroying itself. What did you say? I told her she was giving up. That she owed it to Lily to keep trying, that being tired wasn't a good enough reason to stop fighting. His throat tightened. I was so angry, so desperate. I couldn't accept that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you can't fix everything. What did she say? She said loving someone doesn't mean forcing them to suffer just because you're not ready to let go. She said she'd fought as hard as she could, and it was okay to rest now. She said being tired was exactly a good enough reason to stop. Celeste was quiet for a long moment. Do you think she was right? I think she was right for her. But this isn't the same situation, Celeste. Sarah was dying. There was no other outcome. But Riverside? Those families? That fight isn't over yet. You're not choosing between fighting and dying. You're choosing between fighting and giving up when people are depending on you. But what if I fail them? You probably will. At least partially. But failing while trying is different than failing because you quit. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You don't have to be. That's what having a team means. When you're too tired to fight, someone else picks up the slack. When you want to quit, someone reminds you why you started. When you feel like you're drowning, he reached out and took her hand. Someone throws you a rope. Celeste looked at their joined hands like she'd forgotten what human contact felt like. I miss him so much, every single day, every single moment. I thought if I just kept moving, kept working, kept building things in his name, eventually the missing would stop hurting. But it doesn't. It just lives in my chest like shrapnel, and every breath reminds me he's gone. Yeah, it's like that. Does it ever get better? I don't know. Ask me in another 5 years. She laughed, broken and wet. We're a mess. Completely. But at least we're a mess together. They sat in Julian's garden as the night slowly became morning, two people who'd lost everything learning how to carry each other's weight. And when the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Celeste stood up. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay, I'm not quitting. I'm going to fight Hawthorne Industries. I'm going to lose sleep and money and probably my mind. I'm going to make Richard's life as difficult as possible. And I'm going to do it because Julian deserved better, and these families deserve better, and I'm done letting fear make my decisions. That's the spirit. But I need help, real help, not just lawyers and press conferences. I need someone who knows how to organize communities, how to fight City Hall, how to turn anger into action. You need Gloria. Yes. And I need you to convince her to trust me, really trust me. Because if we're going to win this, we can't be CEO and community organizer. We have to be partners. Evan pulled out his phone and texted Gloria. Emergency meeting. Today. Bring everyone. The response came immediately. Your place or mine? The foundation site. Noon. Bring hard hats. The construction site had transformed since Evan last saw it. What had been a skeletal frame was now recognizable as a building, walls going up, windows being installed, the bones of something that might actually become the rehabilitation center Celeste had promised. Workers moved across the site like ants, each one focused on their small piece of a larger vision. Gloria arrived with 30 people, the core of the Riverside resistance. They stood among the construction equipment and looked at Celeste with expressions that ranged from hopeful to skeptical to outright hostile. "You said you had a plan," Gloria said without preamble. "So talk." Celeste gestured to the building rising behind her. "This is the Julian Hawthorne Rehabilitation and Family Center. It was supposed to open in 8 months. I'm moving the timeline up." "How far up?" 4 months. "We're going to fast-track construction, bring in extra crews, work around the clock if necessary. Because here's what I realized last night. We can't just fight the evictions. We have to offer an alternative so good that the city council can't ignore it." She pulled out new blueprints, spreading them across a makeshift table. "These families need somewhere to go, so we're opening the housing units first. 60 units, fully furnished, available for immediate occupancy. Anyone displaced by Hawthorne Industries gets priority placement, free rent for the first year while they get back on their feet." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One of the younger men spoke up. "That's great, but 60 units doesn't cover 200 families." "You're right, so here's the rest of the plan." Celeste pointed to a section of the blueprints. "We're going to purchase the buildings Hawthorne Industries was planning to demolish." The crowd went silent. "I'm sorry, what?" Gloria said. Hawthorne Industries bought the land from individual property owners, small-time landlords who sold because the offer was too good to refuse. But the deal hasn't closed yet. There's a 45-day window before the sale is final. If someone makes a better offer, the owners can back out. And you're going to make a better offer. I already did, this morning. 20% over Hawthorne's price. The foundation will own the buildings. We'll renovate them, bring them up to code, and convert them into permanently affordable housing, rent-controlled, community-managed, everything the neighborhood needs. One of the older women shook her head. "That's going to cost millions. 30 million, actually, which is exactly how much I have left after liquidating my assets." "You're going to spend your entire fortune on this?" "Yes." "Why?" The question came from a teenage boy, his voice skeptical. "What do you get out of it?" Celeste looked at him steadily. "I get to sleep at night knowing I did something right. I get to build something that matters more than money. I get to honor my son by helping other families in ways I couldn't help my own." She paused. "And I get to prove that Hawthorne Industries doesn't own this city." Gloria was studying the blueprints with the intensity of a general planning a war. "This could work. If the property owners accept your offer, if the city approves the conversion, if you can actually fast-track construction, it could work." "But," Evan prompted, because there was always a but. "But Hawthorne Industries isn't going to just accept this. They're going to fight back. Dirty. They'll challenge the property sales, they'll lobby the city council, they'll make this as expensive and painful as possible." "I'm counting on it," Celeste said, "because every time they fight, we're going to make it public. Every legal filing, every dirty trick, every attempt to prioritize profit over people, we're going to expose it. We're going to make them into the villains they actually are. You want to wage a PR war. I want to make it so politically toxic to support Hawthorne Industries that the city council has no choice but to back our plan instead. We're going to organize. We're going to protest. We're going to make sure every voter in this city knows exactly what's at stake." Gloria looked at her team, then back at Celeste. "You understand this is going to consume your life for the next 4 months. Every waking hour, every dollar you have, every ounce of energy." "I understand. And you're still willing to do it?" "Yes." Gloria extended her hand. "Then let's burn it down and build something better." They shook on it, and Evan felt something shift, like the universe had clicked into a new alignment. This was no longer Celeste's fight or Riverside's fight. This was their fight, together. The next 4 months were exactly the hell Gloria had promised. Celeste spent every day on the phone with lawyers, property owners, construction managers, and city officials. She appeared at every council meeting, every community forum, every protest that Gloria organized. She gave interviews until her voice went hoarse, wrote op-eds until her fingers cramped, and argued with bureaucrats until even Arthur started to look impressed. Evan coordinated between the foundation, the legal team, and the Riverside families. He translated legal documents, organized meetings, kept track of which property owners had accepted offers and which were still negotiating. He picked up Lily from school and brought her to the construction site where she'd spend hours drawing pictures of the building that was slowly taking shape. And Lily became everyone's mascot. She'd talk to construction workers about their families, share her cookies with stressed-out lawyers, and remind Celeste to eat when she got too focused on work to remember. She was still quiet, still careful with her words, but she was present in a way she hadn't been since Sarah died. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into the fight, Evan found her teaching a group of Riverside kids how to make something she called kintsugi cookies. "You have to break them first," Lily explained seriously. "Then you put gold frosting in the cracks. It makes them more beautiful." "Why would you break cookies on purpose?" one of the kids asked. "Because being broken doesn't mean being ruined. It means you get to rebuild yourself into something better." Evan's throat tightened. His 7-year-old daughter was teaching philosophy through baked goods and somehow making it work. That evening, he mentioned it to Celeste. They were in the foundation office, the one that used to be a sitting room, going over property sale documents. "She told me about kintsugi last week," Celeste said, "the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty instead of hiding them." Where did she learn about that? From Sarah's grief counselor, apparently. One of the last sessions before she trailed off. Before Sarah stopped fighting. Yes, Celeste set down her pen. Lily said her mother told her that being broken doesn't mean you're worthless. That sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones that have been shattered and repaired. That the cracks tell a story worth remembering. Sarah was good at finding meaning in terrible things. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was, right up until the end. Evan rubbed his eyes, exhausted. Sometimes I wonder if she'd be proud of what we're doing, or if she'd think I'm using Lily as an excuse to avoid dealing with my own grief. I think she'd be proud. You're teaching Lily that fighting for people matters, that using your pain to help others isn't avoidance, it's transformation. Is that what you're doing? Transforming? Celeste looked around the office, at the blueprints and legal documents and photos of Riverside families taped to the walls. I think I'm trying to. I spent 5 years frozen because I thought that was safer than feeling. But Lily showed me that safety isn't the same as living, that you can carry grief without letting it consume you, that being broken and being brave aren't mutually exclusive. She's pretty wise for someone who's only 7. She's had to be. They worked in comfortable silence for a while longer, and Evan realized that somewhere in the chaos of fighting Hawthorne Industries, he and Celeste had become friends. Not just employer and employee, not just two people bound by shared trauma, but actual friends who could sit together without filling every silence, who trusted each other to handle the hard parts, who'd learned that sometimes the best teams were built from broken pieces. The breakthrough came in week 10. Celeste's phone rang during a council meeting. She almost ignored it until she saw the caller ID, her property lawyer. She stepped out into the hallway and Evan followed. "Tell me you have good news," she said. The lawyer's voice was jubilant. "All 15 property owners accepted your offer, every single one. Hawthorne Industries is out. The buildings are yours." Celeste's knees actually buckled. Evan caught her elbow and she gripped his arm like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "You're sure?" she asked. "No backing out? No last-minute changes? Contracts are signed. Money's transferred. It's done. You own the buildings." "Thank you. Thank you so much." She hung up and looked at Evan with an expression of pure shock. "We did it. We did. We actually did it." "We did what?" "We bought the buildings. All of them. Hawthorne Industries can't demolish them because we own them. The evictions can't happen because the families are now our tenants. We won." Evan felt like he'd been hit by lightning. "We won?" "We won." They stood in the hallway outside the council chambers, two people who'd been fighting for so long they'd forgotten what victory felt like. Then Celeste started laughing, a wild, disbelieving sound that was part relief and part hysteria. "We actually beat them," she said. "We beat Hawthorne Industries with property law and better offers. Richard is going to lose his mind. Let him. He earned it. They went back into the chambers just as the council was about to vote on the Riverside development. Gloria was at the podium, making an impassioned plea for the council to reject Hawthorne's proposal. Celeste walked up and whispered in her ear. Gloria's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, joy, fierce satisfaction. She turned back to the microphone. "I'd like to amend my statement," she said. "The Hawthorne Foundation has just purchased all 15 buildings that Hawthorne Industries was planning to demolish, which means there's nothing to demolish, which means this development project is dead." The chamber erupted. Reporters scrambled for their cameras. Council members looked at each other in confusion. And Richard Castellane, sitting in the back row, went absolutely white. The council president banged his gavel. "Order, I need order, Mrs. Martinez. Is this true?" "Completely true. We have the property deeds if you'd like to see them." We need to verify. The development contract specifically states, "The development contract is worthless without the land," Gloria interrupted. "And the land isn't yours to give anymore. It's ours, and we're going to turn it into affordable housing that actually serves the community instead of displacing it." The vote that followed was almost anticlimactic, 7-2 to reject the Hawthorne Industries development proposal. The same council members who'd approved it 3 months ago now scrambling to distance themselves from a project that had become politically toxic. Outside the building, the Riverside family celebrated like they'd won the lottery. Mrs. Chen hugged Evan so hard he thought his ribs might crack. The Rodriguez family cried with relief. Teenagers who'd been facing new schools and disrupted lives cheered like their team had won the championship. And in the center of it all, Celeste stood with Lily's hand in hers, looking more alive than Evan had ever seen her. A reporter pushed through the crowd. "Mrs. Hawthorne, how does it feel to beat your former company?" "It feels like keeping a promise," Celeste said. "To my son, to these families, to myself. What's next for the foundation? We finish the rehabilitation center, we renovate the buildings, we create the kind of community support system that should have existed all along, and we make sure that profit never gets prioritized over people again. Some people are calling you a hero." Celeste looked at the reporter with something like amusement. "I'm not a hero. I'm a mother who failed her son and is trying to make sure other families don't experience that same failure. Heroes don't need redemption. I do." The reporter started to ask another question, but Lily tugged on Celeste's hand. "You're not bad," Lily said firmly. "You made mistakes, but you fixed them. That's what heroes do." Celeste knelt down to Lily's level. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't listening before." "Fair point." That night, back at the estate, Arthur broke out champagne that was probably older than Evan. They toasted to victories hard won, and families saved, and the kind of hope that only came from refusing to quit, even when quitting was easier. "To Julian," Celeste said, raising her glass, "who deserved better, and to everyone who helped me become someone who could actually give it." They drank, and for the first time in 5 years, Celeste looked like she wasn't being haunted by ghosts, just accompanied by memories that no longer had to hurt quite so much. The rehabilitation center opened 4 months later, exactly on Celeste's accelerated schedule. It was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows that let in natural light, therapy rooms painted in calming colors, a rooftop garden where children could learn about plants and growth, and the slow, patient work of healing. The affordable housing units were bright and accessible, designed with input from the families who would actually live there. On opening day, hundreds of people showed up. Riverside families, city officials, reporters, physical therapists and doctors and social workers who'd been recruited to staff the center. And in the corner, looking uncomfortable but present, even a few board members from Hawthorne Industries who'd been forced to acknowledge that maybe, Celeste had been right all along. Celeste stood at the podium with Lily beside her, looking out at the crowd, and Evan saw her hands trembling. 5 years ago, she began, I lost my son, and I spent the next 5 years trying to hide from that loss. I built walls. I drove the same route every day, like if I just repeated the ritual enough times, somehow the pain would stop. I convinced myself that being frozen was the same as being strong. She looked down at Lily. And then this child showed me I was wrong. She showed me that being broken doesn't mean being worthless, that grief doesn't have to be a prison, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself feel everything and trust that you'll survive it. But Lily squeezed her hand. This center is named for Julian, Celeste continued, but it's built on the foundation of everyone who refused to let me stay frozen, the families who welcomed me into their fight even when I didn't deserve it, the team who worked around the clock to make this possible, and especially Evan and Lily Mercer, who answered a job nobody wanted and somehow saved my life in the process. Evan felt his throat tighten. He hadn't saved anyone. He'd just shown up and driven and let his daughter be the remarkable person she'd always been, but maybe that was enough. This center represents a promise, Celeste said, that families in crisis will have support, that children who are struggling will have access to the best care possible, that no parent will have to make the choice I made between their child and their capacity to care for them. We're going to do better. We have to do better. She cut the ribbon to thunderous applause. The doors opened and people flooded into the building, exploring the therapy rooms and gardens and spaces designed with so much care and intention that you could feel the love built into every wall. Evan found Celeste later in Julian's memorial garden, a smaller version of the hospital garden with the same fountain and the same plaque, but this time surrounded by children's laughter and parents' conversations and the sound of life continuing. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "I just drove." "You did a lot more than drive, Evan. You gave me a reason to keep trying. You and Lily both." Speaking of Lily, Evan gestured toward the art therapy room where Lily was teaching a group of kids how to make kintsugi art, breaking clay pots and repairing them with gold paint, turning damage into beauty. "I think she's found her calling. She's going to change the world, that one. If she doesn't run it first." They watched the crowd together, two people who'd started this journey frozen and desperate and barely holding on, who'd learned that healing wasn't linear or clean or easy, that sometimes you had to break completely before you could rebuild, that being human meant carrying your grief without letting it define you. "What happens now?" Evan asked. "You've spent months fighting Hawthorne Industries and building the center. What do you do when the crisis is over?" "I keep going. Keep running the foundation. Keep making sure it actually helps people instead of just making me feel better about my failures." Celeste smiled. "And apparently I'm going to sell the estate and buy something smaller, something that feels like a home instead of a museum. That's a big change. I'm tired of living in a mausoleum. I'm tired of rattling around in 43 empty rooms. I want a place where Lily can visit without feeling like she's in a castle, where Arthur can retire without worrying about managing a small kingdom, where I can just be." "Where are you thinking?" "I found a house in Riverside, actually, one of the buildings we bought. It needs renovation, but it's perfect. 3 bedrooms, a garden, walking distance from the center, close enough that I can be present, far enough that I remember there's a world outside these walls." Evan felt something warm bloom in his chest. "You're moving to Riverside. If the neighborhood will have me, I think the neighborhood would be honored." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over a building that represented hope and healing and second chances. And Evan realized that somewhere in the chaos of the past months, his definition of family had expanded. It wasn't just him and Lily anymore. It was Celeste and Arthur and Gloria and Mrs. Chen and all the Riverside families who'd fought together and won together and learned that sometimes the best families were the ones you chose. That night, back at their apartment, Lily was drawing at the kitchen table, but instead of her usual empty house, she was drawing the rehabilitation center, and inside the windows, she'd added stick figures, adults and children, all of them smiling, all of them together. "That's beautiful, Ladybug." "It's our family," Lily said. "All of them." "All of them?" "You, me, Mrs. Hawthorne, Arthur, Mrs. Chen, Gloria, everyone who helped. Everyone who cares." She looked up at him with Sarah's gray-green eyes. "We're not just us anymore, are we?" "No, we're not." "Is that okay?" Evan thought about the past months, the fear and the fighting, and the moments when he'd thought they'd lose everything, but also the moments when Celeste had laughed for the first time in years, when Lily had spoken up in a council meeting and told grown adults they were wrong, When Mrs. Chen had hugged them both and said family wasn't about blood, it was about showing up. Yeah, Ladybug, it's more than okay. Lily nodded and went back to her drawing, adding more figures, filling the windows with life. And Evan watched her, this child who'd survived losing her mother and somehow still believed that broken things could be made beautiful again. She was right, of course. She'd been right all along. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning that felt like the world had been washed clean, Evan drove to the Hawthorne estate one last time. The moving trucks were already there, Arthur directing traffic with the precision of a general commanding troops. Celeste emerged from the house carrying a box of Julian's things, the blanket, some photos, toys that would go to the center instead of storage. She looked lighter somehow, like she'd shed a weight she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Ready? Evan asked. Terrified. But yes. They drove through the city together, this route they'd taken 100 times before, but in reverse. Past the bank where she'd fought with her board. Past the construction site that was now a thriving center. Past the law office where she'd signed papers that changed everything. Past the hospital where Julian's memory lived in bronze letters and flowering gardens. But instead of stopping at each place, they drove past. Because this wasn't about rituals anymore. It wasn't about retracing steps or trying to find the moment where everything went wrong. It was about moving forward, about building a future instead of haunting a past. They arrived at the Riverside house, modest, weathered, perfect. Lily was already there with Mrs. Chen, directing furniture placement with the authority of a tiny dictator. The couch goes there, Lily announced, so you can see the garden, and the kitchen table goes by the window so we can eat breakfast with sunshine. We? Celeste asked. Well, yeah. Daddy and I live 3 blocks away. We're going to have breakfast together all the time. That's what families do. Celeste looked at Evan, her expression complicated. Is that what we are? A family? Evan thought about it. They weren't related by blood, weren't married or partnered or connected by any traditional definition, but they'd fought together and grieved together and learned how to be human together. They'd saved each other in ways that mattered more than biology. Yeah, he said. I think we are. Celeste smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed her entire face. Then I guess we better get used to breakfast together. They spent the day unpacking, arguing about furniture placement, eating pizza on the floor because the table wasn't set up yet. Arthur appeared with tea and disapproval about the chaos, but even he was smiling. Gloria stopped by with a housewarming plan and stayed for hours telling stories about Riverside politics. Mrs. Chen brought enough food to feed everyone twice over. And as the sun set, they all gathered in Celeste's new garden, smaller than the estate's grounds, but infinitely more alive. Lily had hung wind chimes she'd made in art therapy, and they sang in the evening breeze like tiny bells. To new beginnings, Celeste said, raising her cup of tea. To families we choose, Gloria added. To being brave even when we're scared, Lily said solemnly. To answering ads that nobody else wanted, Evan finished. They drank their tea and told stories as the stars came out. And somewhere in that garden, surrounded by people who'd learned that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about making peace with the cracks, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the desperate kind that demanded happy endings, but the quiet kind that acknowledged pain and loss and grief, and chose to build something beautiful anyway. Lily fell asleep against Celeste's shoulder, and Celeste held her like she was precious, like she was a second chance neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. Thank you, Celeste whispered to Evan over Lily's head. For what? For not trying to fix me. For just showing up, for letting your daughter teach me how to be human again. Thank you for giving us a reason to keep fighting, for showing us that being broken doesn't mean being finished. They sat in the garden as the night deepened, 3 people who'd survived losing everything and somehow found each other on the other side. Who'd learned that the cracks in your heart could be filled with gold if you had the courage to let people help. That grief and hope could coexist. That families came in all shapes and sizes, and the best ones were built from shared trauma and mutual healing. Lily stirred and mumbled something in her sleep. Celeste smoothed her hair back, and Evan saw the gesture was instinctive now. Natural. the movement of someone who'd remembered how to love. "She's going to be okay," Celeste said softly. "Yeah, she is. So are we." "Yeah, we are." And sitting there in that garden, in a house in a neighborhood they'd saved together, surrounded by a family they'd chosen and built and fought for, Evan believed it. They were going to be okay. Not perfect, not healed in any final or complete way, still carrying their losses, still figuring out how to exist in a world without the people they'd loved most. But okay, alive, human, together. And sometimes that was more than enough. Sometimes that was everything. The wind chimes sang in the darkness, and somewhere in the rehabilitation center, children slept peacefully in rooms designed for healing. The Riverside families lived in homes they no longer feared losing, and 3 people who'd been strangers less than a year ago had become the kind of family that proved love wasn't about blood or obligation, but about showing up when it mattered most. Evan Mercer had answered an ad for a job nobody wanted, and found a life worth living instead.